Good morning, distinguished guests, distinguished speakers, panelists, faculty members, students, and all participants joining us both on-site and online. Welcome to the seminar on ASEAN Regional Economic Outlook and Fiscal Policy, entitled Navigating Global Uncertainty, Sustaining Growth and Stability in ASEAN. This seminar is jointly organized by the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and the ASEAN+3 Macroeconomic Research Office, AMRO. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the main program, we would like to invite all participants to stand for the singing of the Indonesian national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. Thank you. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the welcome remarks, we will have a short photo session. Please remain seated. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the first agenda, welcome remarks. It is our great honor to invite Professor Didi Ahyari, PhD, Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, to deliver the welcome remarks. Professor Didi Ahyari, may we respectfully invite you to deliver your remarks.
Distinguished representative from AMRO, Bank Indonesia, and the Ministry of Finance, esteemed panelists, speakers, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada. On behalf of the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, it is my great honor to welcome all of you to this seminar on navigating global uncertainty, sustaining growth and stability in ASEAN. We are particularly privileged to collaborate with AMRO and host distinguished economists and policymakers at the forefront of the regional economic analysis and policy dialogue. This seminar takes place at a critical moment. ASEAN economies have demonstrated resilience in recent years, supported by strong macroeconomic fundamentals and regional cooperation. At the same time, we face an increasingly complex global environment characterized by geopolitical tensions, trade fragmentation, and ongoing uncertainty. Therefore, the discussion today are both timely and essential. According to the ASEAN+3 Regional Economic Outlook, the region continues to benefit from strong domestic demand and deepening regional integration. Yet, we must also recognize the growing downside risks from external shocks, such as energy price volatility, to uncertainties in global trade and technology cycle. At this same time, insight from the fiscal policy report remind us that the policy space that supported economies during the pandemic has narrowed. Governments now face difficult trade-off, sustaining growth while preserving fiscal sustainability and ensuring that the development remains inclusive. This is why today's seminar is so important. By bringing together policymakers, academics, and regional experts, we aim to deepen our understanding of three key questions. How can ASEAN sustain its growth momentum amid global uncertainty? How should fiscal and macroeconomic policies adapt to evolving risks? And how can deeper regional integration strengthen long-term resilience? We are especially grateful to our speakers from AMRO for sharing their latest assessment and to our panelists who represent academia, policymaking institutions, and regional organizations for contributing their valuable perspectives. At FEB UGM, we strongly believe that collaboration between academia and policy institutions is essential to producing meaningful and impactful insights. Events like this not only enrich academic discourse, but also help inform real-world policy decisions. Before I conclude, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to all partners, organizers, and participants who made this event possible. I wish all of us a fruitful and engaging discussion. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue to the first presentation session entitled Global Uncertainty and Regional Economic Integration. This session will present key findings from the ASEAN+3 Regional Economic Outlook 2026, focusing on regional economic prospects and risks amid global uncertainty with relevance to Indonesia's context. It is our pleasure to invite Ms. Catherine Koh, Senior Economist at AMRO, to deliver the first presentation. Ms. Catherine Koh, may we respectfully invite you to deliver your presentation.
Your Honorable Pak Gumilang, distinguished faculty, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to be able to share with you here our ASEAN+3 Regional Economic Outlook. And let me just get straight to it before I let you leave all the difficult questions to our panelists later. So let's get started with the presentation. I know, I'm sorry, this is not it, I promise. All right, here we are. So the ASEAN+3 Regional Economic Outlook. If you take nothing else away today, remember that what we are seeing right now is that we're navigating the uncertainties that Pak Didi has just mentioned earlier from a position of strength. And let me go into why we say this. But before that, let me first start with who is AMRO? For our faculties or even students joining us here online and on site, if you're wondering what does AMRO stand for, it actually stands for the ASEAN+3 Macroeconomic Research Office. And I know naturally that would give a lot more questions as to what is ASEAN+3. So ASEAN+3 comprise of the ASEAN region, plus China, including Hong Kong, China, Japan, and Korea. So who are we? We are not a NGO, we are not a private sector, we are not a think tank. We're an international organization, which means we are essentially international civil servants who do not serve one particular government, but we serve the governments of our membership, which are the 14 economies that I mentioned earlier. We're based in Singapore, and how we conduct our core function is by conducting macroeconomic research and surveillance, supporting the Chiang Mai multilateralization initiative, and also providing technical assistance to our member economies. The team that you see here with you today are mainly from the macroeconomic surveillance and research portion of the different roles that AMRO plays. We also provide the secretariat support to the ASEAN+3 finance process, and we serve as a regional knowledge hub for the region. What does this mean in terms of practical day-to-day work, right? The surveillance and research that I talked about is something that we also share with the public through our various publications. In here, we actually have 3 flagship publications: the ASEAN+3 Regional Economic Outlook, which I would share later, the ASEAN+3 Financial Stability Report, which looks at the stability of the financial sector. This comes out usually in October, and also the ASEAN+3 Fiscal Policy Report, which will be shared by my colleague later. On top of what we do in terms of flagship reports, we also conduct annual consultation visits. So in conducting macroeconomic surveillance, we don't just sit at our computer and try to figure out what's happening in the economy. We actually go down to the ground too. So we try to visit at least once a year to all the member economies that we monitor, and we try to assess what is actually happening on the ground. To do so, we would talk to people from the government, different departments, different areas, members from the private sector, and even engage with academia like yourself to really figure out what's happening in each of the economies that we monitor. We would therefore publish an annual consultation report after that. Other publications that we do are more thematic in nature, so such as working papers, analytical notes, market insights. All this usually comes out related to whether the issue or the more pertinent issues that we're looking at the moment. And we also provide data support in terms of surveillance tools that are available on our website and also in some separate repository for our member economies. Now, having set the ground on who we are and what we do, let me get into the ASEAN+3 outlook. Today, we're going to cover a few things. First of all, we're going to look at the short-term outlook. What is really happening right now? All the uncertainties that Pak Didi talked about earlier. Basically, for the ASEAN+3 region, we are starting off from a strong position, but there are multiple downside risks, and they are materially higher, and I will go into each of them in detail later. We will also take a step back and look at longer-term transformation of economic linkages, where you would see how we have, as a region, over the last 2 decades, transformed into a more regionally anchored one. And lastly, we will look into ASEAN integration in more detail to see how the deepening economic resilience that we have developed over the years has actually accorded us some resilience to weather the challenges that we're seeing today. So in terms of the short-term outlook, let's start with that. To set the context as to how we're entering 2026, we have to first look at how we did in 2025. So in 2025, if you remember, in April, the global economy was upended. We had the Liberation Day tariffs, and there were a lot of uncertainties and a lot of fears as to what was going to happen and what that means. And I think everybody was very worried at that time. Now, fast forward a year later, to this year, we actually realized that we fared in 2025 much better than we had expected. How do we say that? We say that if you look at the chart here, where you see, even in AMRO, we have a quarterly update to our REO, and we find ourselves consistently upgrading throughout the year, something you would not have expected in early April. What was underpinning this? So a few factors. First of all, the tariff developments, tariff outcomes turn out to be much lower than what was initially feared. If you remember, in Liberation Day, we were facing some economies, tariffs up to 49%. Eventually, by the end of the year, the regional tariffs settled at about 20%, with some variety across economies for sure, but the outcome eventually was much better. There were also exemptions that were given, and that protected several of the key sectors within our economies. And there was also tariff developments in terms of the tariff deals that progressed throughout the year that provided some certainty for businesses. So generally, tariff outcome was much better. Other things that supported growth on top of that was also the AI-driven demand for semiconductor. AI-driven semiconductor demand was very strong, and that lifted exports for almost half of our economies in the region. On top of that, we also have intra-regional trade that strengthened, even though trade to the US moderated for some of our economies. And this intra-regional trade again ties into the integration story that Pak Didi talked about earlier that provided us this buffer to weather the storm. Now, this is all external developments. On top of the external development, what was important is that domestic demand was a very firm anchor across most of our economies, and especially in ASEAN. Private consumption remained strong and was very favorable in terms of labor market developments and also the low inflation that we all faced last year. So if you remember, headline inflation for the region as a whole is about 0.9%. Across ASEAN and even in Indonesia, we didn't see any inflationary pressure significantly last year. And that supported actual spending, real income, and therefore maintained private consumption as a very strong anchor of growth for our region. But apart from consumption, the other thing that was particular for ASEAN was investment flows. Investment flows, especially FDI investments, continue to come into ASEAN, and they were broad-based. They weren't just going to one particular economy or in one particular sector. They were very broad-based, and all this supported 2025's growth performance as a whole. So imagine this, at the end of 2025, we're standing at this very strong position and we're heading into 2026. That's where the issues start coming in, right? So in 2026, as we're headed in from a relatively strong position, we start finding ourselves amidst a lot of challenges just 2 months into the year. Therefore, what do we expect? We would expect growth this year to be slightly slower at about 4% for this year and next, and inflation to trend higher. Now, I would caution to say that this forecast that we have right here is subject to a lot of uncertainties that we are still grappling with even right now. And key among these uncertainties is definitely the development in the Middle East. So Middle East conflict escalated in February 28, and since then, we still have no certainty as to where this is going, what is happening, and where oil prices in particular, are going to end up at the end of the day, right? But apart from the Middle East conflict, which is getting a lot of headlines, there are also other things underway that's affecting our economies. So first of all, technology cycle. Remember the AI boom that I talked about earlier, supporting growth very strongly last year. Are we still going to see the same growth this year? Are we still going to see the same growth for the years to come, right? And how strong is that going to be? That is definitely going to affect our economies going forward. And everybody has forgotten about tariff by now, but it's still very important in the sense that tariff developments, the tariff global surcharge that we have is going to expire by end of June. What's going to replace it? And what's going to happen with all the legal challenges that are surrounding this tariff issues? And also the different investigations like Section 301 for most of our economies in the region, that still hangs over us. And as, in terms of the risk and where this could go, anybody's guess at the moment. Which is why we would caution that although we have a general trajectory as to where we see growth and inflation going, this is highly uncertain, and we continue to monitor this very closely. Let me just illustrate some of these uncertainties, and especially for the Middle East conflict. Now, to put into context, the Middle East conflict is the most significant energy supply disruption that we have seen in decades. Now, there are two measures to this. First of all, is in terms of the price increase, just the price levels that we have seen so far, particularly for oil price, gas to a lesser extent. And to put this in context again, if we compare to the closest proxy we have in recent time, and that's the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022, the scale of disruption that we're seeing right now is 4 times larger than what we saw back then. And if you remember in 2022, we had inflation spiking all across the region. Right now, we're facing an amount of disruption in terms of the flow of oil and gas that's 4 times that amount, right? So the scale is definitely something that's very big right now compared to where we were before. The other thing that is highly uncertain and will determine the outcome of this is the duration of the conflict. At the start of the conflict, I think many people thought that the conflict was going to be short-lived. There were expectations of this is going to be resolved within a few weeks. Later, it turned into a few months. As of now, we're actually seeing that it's much longer than what we would expect. And even in line with that, we're going to revise our forecast, and we will relook at this to take into account this latest developments. So the duration of the conflict, even now, is nowhere near, certain in terms of where it would end and at which point it would settle, right? So we conducted a scenario analysis to kind of give some measures and give a sense of scale as to how bad this could go and how bad economies could be affected. So in terms of our baseline assumption, this was done in early April. We were expecting year price for Brent oil price to be at about $80 to $90 for the year. Right now, if we were to look at the futures curve, this is definitely a bit on the low side. Futures curve right now is averaging at about $90 to $100 for the year. So even back then, we decided, because there was so much uncertainty, we should do a scenario analysis and let's look at the range of developments that could happen and the outcome for our inflation. And at uncontrolled regional widening of the conflict, which means, let's say if the conflict were not to be confined to Iran at that time and to broaden into the wider region, we could potentially see oil price averaging above $100 for the rest of the year. And if that were to happen, we would see inflation increasing to 2.2% for ASEAN+3 as a whole. The impact definitely varies across different economies. Some would have higher pass-through compared to others, but by and large, it's going to be a big shock. But at that time, we also thought, if the conflict is contained and it does end within a few weeks, as people had expected at that time, inflation could be slightly lower, but still at about above 1%. Now, the outcome of all these developments could definitely be much worse than what we're projecting here, and that's because we're projecting on a linear projection, as with any models, right? But what we cannot capture essentially in a model are non-linear effects and also other developments in terms of sentiments or in terms of, even supply shocks and how critical that could be for certain hidden segments of the economy that we can't possibly foresee in a macro model. So all these things could also upend our expectations. And the impact will be uneven for our economies for sure, and the severity will also depend on our import independence, especially to the Middle East, the available buffers that we have, and the policy space that the government has to manage this shock. Now, as I mentioned, apart from the Middle East, we do have other risks to look out for, which is the technology cycle. Now, technology cycle, let me just go quickly into that. AI demand was very strong last year and was in fact the strongest export driver for the year. At the moment, we don't see any significant pullback, and we are expecting continued growth in AI demand, but at a much slower pace than what we saw last year. But if there were to be any sharp correction, as in if AI does not deliver the promise that it had hoped for initially, and investments were to be scaled back, we will see a potential pullback in terms of demand for semiconductors, and that would weigh on growth for our highly open region. On the other hand, we also see tariff policies. As I mentioned, if tariff policies were to remain where they are at about 10% for everybody, which is also a slight upside to Indonesia compared to the tariff deal that it had last year, if it were to remain at this level or even lapse without any replacement of tariffs, that would be positive for growth. But at the same time, if it's escalated in terms of more tariffs in different forms, that would definitely weigh on growth for our region as a whole. Another thing to caution is that, as with any linear model, this risk can also interact and they can happen at different timing. And if we were to couple this on top of a prolonged energy shock, it's definitely a highly uncertain global environment that we're operating in, and we'll be seeing a wide range of uncertainties for sure. Now, I don't want to leave you with that, bleak story. And let me just caution that in terms of policies, our government across the region do have the policy space to manage these shocks. And they have meaningful both fiscal and monetary space. And the important thing right now is to ensure that these policies are calibrated to address the shocks that we are facing. On the fiscal policy front, we're advising for targeted and temporary support to expose households and sectors, and roughly to avoid broad-based price suppression, which could then fuel inflation and erode our fiscal sustainability in the medium term. The monetary policy front, we advise to look through the initial energy price shock, but to respond strongly if core inflation and wages were to see signs of inflation feeding through. Above it all, clear communication is essential to anchoring inflation expectations. But more importantly, beyond addressing just the immediate shock, we should also see this crisis as an opportunity for the region to strengthen its long-term resilience. In this sense, you could diversify energy and input sources, accelerate the energy transition, which we're already seeing signs through the ASEAN Power Grid, strengthen buffers, and preserve open regional trade channels. Now, open regional trade, especially intra-regional trade, had helped us weather the challenges that we had last year. Deeper integration on this front could strengthen us even further. In the chapter 1 special feature here, we actually do also look at another very specific area in terms of monetary policy conduct. How would you conduct monetary policy in this highly uncertain environment? So we talk a lot about how challenging it is, but to actually, we also took the time to distill it down to say, okay, if these are your policy trade-offs, what are the different things you should consider? And I'll invite you to take a look at this. Now, let me go to the second part. So we talk about resilience, we talk about the region being able to weather this quite well last year. This is something that did not happen overnight. It's not like we were lucky and we just happened to do well last year. This was because we already had an evolution of economic linkages over the past decades that has put us in this position. And what exactly has happened in the past decade? Now, first of all, we see a significant shift in terms of more integrated regional supply chains. Now, what do we mean by this? If we look at the global supply hubs in 2000, and that's the chart on your left, you would see that globally, there are generally 3 different nodes, centered in Europe, on Germany, in North America on the US, and in Asia here, centered on Japan. This is the supply node, so what you're essentially seeing is the flow of goods and services from each of this economy to the different economies around them. Now, if we fast forward 20 years later, in 2024, we still see globally 3 main nodes, which is also centered in Europe, North America, and in Asia. But this time, in Europe, it is still centered in Germany. In North America, it is still centered in the US. But in Asia, it is now centered on China. Now, this does not mean this is a story of displacement. It's not like China has become the largest node of supply right now, displacing Japan. It is more of a story of densification. We've got more trade flowing in between the the different economies in our region, and Japan and Korea in particular now specializing in high precision inputs. And the ASEAN economies have also been driving the mid-value manufacturing and services sector as a whole. And this is why we talk about this as a story of a densification of supply chain rather than a displacement. It's not a zero-sum game. Now, this is on the supply front. Let me turn to the demand side. On the demand side, we see a similar picture. We essentially also see that the region has become a larger demand hub right now globally, and also for itself. So over here, you would see the demand of supplies and goods and services that are moving across the global economy, and you would see that the hub for China has increased significantly in the past 24 years. Now, to put this in perspective, the ASEAN+3 region as a whole is now the largest final market in the world today. We are larger collectively than even the US. We account for 28% of global final demand. Now, let's contrast this to what we're all thinking, right? You're thinking we usually produce some intermediate goods for final consumption somewhere else. That may be true 20 years ago. It's no longer true today. Today, globally, we're the largest consumer in the world. And that explains to a certain extent why there's growing densification across even the supplies of goods and services within our region. A large chunk of it is coming to ourselves, right? Now, let me zoom in on Indonesia. Indonesia's economic ties with ASEAN+3 has always been strong, and it remains very significant even today. The chart on the left is something you're probably more familiar with. This is just gross exports by markets. So in terms of exports to each of these markets, you would see that ASEAN+3 accounts for almost 60% of Indonesia's exports. A large chunk of it right now is going to China, but ASEAN remains the second largest source of destination in terms of Indonesia's exports. But if we were to strip down, because gross exports contains things that are also exported for intermediate processing. To put this into context, you can either sell a laptop as a whole, or you could sell parts of the laptop that are now assembled somewhere else and then exported out from somewhere else. So if you export the whole laptop as a whole, that would be export of final goods. But if you would export parts of it that is assembled somewhere else, then you might say, right, that's not a real export. I'm actually just giving parts and it's finally produced somewhere else. If we were to strip out that part of the process and we were to only look at just the final use, that's the chart you'll be seeing on the right. So in terms of value-added exports, how much do you actually produce in the final goods that is actually consumed somewhere else? You would see that for the ASEAN+3 region, we consume almost 50% of what Indonesia produces in terms of final use, right? And a similar picture in terms of individual economy breakdown. You have China as the largest single source, but the US is the second source, followed by ASEAN. This is in terms of final consumption for the domestic value-added exports. So let me summarize these big shifts, right? We've talked about a lot of things, but generally, this would summarize it all. That in the old model that we all have in our minds, that Asia is the factory of the world, that is no longer true today. We continue to be a very strong manufacturing powerhouse, but we have also increasingly become more regionally anchored. We are also increasingly supplying more to our own regional demand, and this has been reinforced by the investment flows that we have accumulated over the years. But what does this mean, right? So all these shifts are significant, they are nice, but what does it mean for us? It means two main things. First of all, if we're more regionally anchored, that also means we are more vulnerable to each other now. What happens to one economy will also happen to the regional economy. Previously, we have always thought of ourselves as a very open economy. So whatever happens in the global economy affects us. We have to shift that thinking to also think about whatever happens to our regional economy would also impact us as well. So the second implication is on structural upgrading. Over the years, we have also talked about value adding and moving up the value chain. So in this chart here, we map value added versus concentration risk. The risk of just value adding is that you risk going into a very concentrated sector. You can be value adding, but you're suddenly going into a very narrow field. So ideally, where you want to move is you want to move to the left top quadrant, where you are producing high value added products, but at very low concentration risk, which means you're not particularly vulnerable to any sector or any economy. What we have seen across ASEAN is that in the last 24 years, Indonesia and even ASEAN has actually moved up the value chain, but we've also moved increasingly to the right. So we have also increased our concentration risk, which then again implies that we would be more vulnerable to more selected sectors than we had hoped for. Now, roughly, in a big summary, right, if we were to look at regional integration, what it means for us is that definitely we all know of the benefits, right? It provides a buffer against external shocks. We have more supply chain diversification, and it also boosts productivity and income gains in the long run. But there are also higher risks. We have more cyclical exposure to each other now, and there's also concentration risk. We're more vulnerable to selected disruption in key targeted areas. So what can policy do, or how can we manage this kind of risk now that we know that both risks and benefits of being more regionally anchored? So in the short term, we need to manage the synchronization in terms of having a sound domestic framework to ensure that any policy spillovers coming from our deeper linkages is something that we have a domestic framework to manage. We need to increase regional dialogue. Now that we know what's happening to our regional economies affect us just as much, it is therefore equally important to make sure that we're talking to each other and we know what's happening to the economies. And in this front, AMRO supports the ASEAN+3 finance process to facilitate this discussion among our member economies. And we need to be prepared also for global shock. Even though we're becoming more regionally anchored, we also cannot forget that we are also very exposed to global developments. And that means preserving fiscal space, the monetary flexibility, and also the policy buffers that we have. And it's something that we should accumulate during good days to prepare ourselves for the shocks. On the structural front, we need to also sustain long-term growth by deepening our domestic upgrading, diversifying our economies more, and more importantly, to ensure that the developments that we're seeing is one that is inclusive, one that does not omit certain firms or certain sectors or certain workers. It needs to be a growth that is felt collectively and is shared throughout. Now, our chapter 2 has another special feature that looks at what this means for ASEAN integration as a whole. And let me go into that right now. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with this. This has been something that ASEAN has talked about a lot. The intra-ASEAN trade has stagnated, and it has stagnated at about 22%. The big question is 22% fair? Is this where it should be? Is it too low or is it too high, right? So we tried to assess this by running an econometric model to see if this is where the model determines where we should belong. And we do find that this is quite consistent with the model predicted values. And even if we were to add in some policy variables, we would see that intra-regional trade for ASEAN would only increase by a little bit more. It only increases to about 28%. It's getting us nowhere to where we thought we should be, which is commonly compared to the EU at 60%, right? So what is really holding us back? We do find that if we were to add the ASEAN+3, the picture becomes a bit richer. We certainly could move up as intra-regional integration to about 43%. So what is really happening? So one of the things that we find constraining the intra-ASEAN integration is this, that we simply do not have the spread in terms of the economic complexity and diversity of our member economies, and we do not have the income level to be able to sustain us at very strong intra-regional trade among ourselves. Essentially, this means we are not producing, as different economies, goods that are demanded by equal measure or by more measure by our fellow regional economies, right? So, and this is happening because we are not at an income level that's enough to be able to sustain this. This is unlike the case of the European Union. So the green bubbles that you're seeing here is for the EU. You would see that they have higher economic complexity and they are all at higher income levels. So what can we do, or how do we get there? We also find a few things also while we're investigating this. And we find one of the important things is that intra-ASEAN investment is very low, even lower than intra-ASEAN trade that we saw earlier, and those were trade in goods. So here it's at 11% as opposed to 22% that we saw earlier. So we have always been a very good global FDI hub in terms of ASEAN as a whole. They've always attracted a lot of FDI, but we haven't really invested in each other a lot. So for example, what you would be thinking of is how many Gojeks can you think of in the region, right? Grab is a success story, or even AirAsia, you do see a lot of it, but how many more of those do we have in terms of regional champions, in terms of actual investments across the region? We actually really don't have as much as we would have liked compared to the other regions. Then the deep question is, of course, so what do we do about it? Now that we know all the problems, right? Over here, we propose 3 policy priorities. The first is that ASEAN is already doing a lot to disentangle the gaps that it has. It is already working on reducing non-tariff barriers, on further liberalizing services sector, and all the other measures that they are doing very good work on. We say continue on those fronts. You realize what you have currently and remove all the buffers that you do, barriers that you have for deeper integration. Keep up with that good work. The other 2 emphases that we want to place is on the next 2 policy priorities. One is that you're already attracting a lot of FDI. How do you make the most out of it? How do you turn that FDI into domestic upgrading? And that's what we mean by leveraging the global value chain linkages that we have to turn that into something sustainable and productive for your own economy. And the third one is to focus on promoting intra-regional investment. And for this in particular, we would have to think of how do we create more Gojeks? How do we create more Grab economies in the region? We need to create new investment flows, which would then lead to greater trade. Once you've got investment in another country, and that's where the natural exchange of goods and services would happen. And that's essentially what happened with FDI when they came into our economies, say even 30 to 50 years ago for most of our economies in the region. So in terms, to put that into perspective, generally this is how we see the levels of development for an economy. You start off being very resource-based, and this is definitely true for Indonesia. You have firms that are producing for local demand, and your goods are natural endowments, natural resources. Then you move into a domestic-centric economy, where you move into manufacturing, but mostly still using domestic input to produce. Then you move into an export-oriented economy, where now you sell abroad all the things that you're producing domestically, right? So the next step that we would propose for ASEAN economies is to turn into an internationally focused region. And that's the next step for our broader economic development. where now you're not just producing for a domestic economy, or you're not just producing for the world, you're using goods and services from across the world to produce for the rest of the world. And that's the next leap that ASEAN would need to take. And what would that mean for the overall ASEAN+3, ASEAN resilience? It would mean that, and this is again just a model estimate, we could potentially almost double our intra-regional trade if we are able to do good on all these different policy fronts that I talked about earlier. And a more integrated ASEAN would also spell a more integrated and a more resilient ASEAN+3 as a whole. And on that note, let me end here and invite all of you to take a look at the report, which is also available in 10 languages, including Indonesia, just for the summary. But the deeper report and deeper explanation and also discussion on all these issues can be found on this. Let me end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Catherine Koh, for such an insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the second presentation session entitled Fiscal Policy Under Global Uncertainty. This session will present key findings from the ASEAN+3 Fiscal Policy Report 2026, including recent fiscal developments, regional challenges, policy trade-offs, and strategies for enhancing resilience while sustaining growth. It is our pleasure to invite Mr. Byung-Hun Nam, Deputy Group Head and Senior Economist at AMRO, to deliver the second presentation. Mr. Byung-Hun Nam, may we respectfully invite you to deliver your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to present AMRO's ASEAN+3 Fiscal Policy Report. So this report provides an in-depth analysis of fiscal development and followed by a policy discussion. So it complements the more broader discussion on the macroeconomic situation of the area that Catherine has just presented. So this year, its main theme is, as you can see from the cover slide, strengthening fiscal management amid the emerging headwinds. So in today's presentation, I will begin with a brief overview of recent fiscal developments and the outlook across the ASEAN+3 member economies. Then I will discuss the key fiscal and structural challenges. And then finally, I will outline the AMRO's view on the strengthening fiscal management to address these kind of challenges. So let me first provide a brief overview of the recent fiscal developments in the region. So fiscal developments in 2025 reflected basically active fiscal policy stance, characterized by the expansion of spending. The left-hand side chart shows the fiscal balance from 2019 to 2025. As you know, the fiscal balance is defined as the difference between the government's total revenue and the total expenditure. And the fiscal deficit means the government is spending more than what they collect in revenue. So fiscal developments in 2025 was pretty mixed, with the improving in the half of the member economies and deteriorating in the other half. However, in general, the fiscal balances remained weaker, or in other words, fiscal deficits remained larger or wider compared with the pre-pandemic levels. So similarly, in Indonesia, the fiscal deficit narrowed between 2021 and 2023, but has widened again since 2024. The right-hand side chart illustrates how changes in revenue and expenditure contributed to the movement in the fiscal balance in 2025. The revenue performance was generally strong across the region, with the revenue increasing as a share of GDP in most of member economies, except for a few. On the expenditure side, it increased across all economies. So various forms of transfers and vouchers were introduced to mitigate the cost of living pressure and boost the domestic consumption. For example, Indonesia also implemented large-scale, short-term targeted cash transfers to protect the household's purchasing power of the inflationary pressure. In addition, fiscal and quasi-fiscal measures, such as loan guarantees, interest rate subsidies, and tax relief, were provided to address the impact of the trade shock. And in 2025, the government debt continued to rise in many ASEAN+3 economies. As we discussed in the previous slide, the fiscal deficit remained larger than their pre-pandemic levels. Then how are these deficits financed? Typically through borrowing in terms of issuing more government bonds. So larger deficit means more borrowing. So naturally, this has led to the increase in government debt to GDP ratio, as shown in the right-hand side, left-hand side chart. And over the medium term, we project that this debt ratio will gradually decline or stabilize, but it will be remain elevated, still elevated compared to the pre-pandemic levels. And in Indonesia, also the government debt to GDP ratio rose to 40.5% in 2025, about 10 percentage points higher than in 2019. So while it is expected to gradually decline and remain relatively low compared to other peer economies, but it is still elevated compared to the pre-pandemic level. And despite this expected stabilization in debt ratio, debt servicing pressures are likely to remain elevated, as shown in the right-hand side chart. So this reflects the rising principal payment on maturing debt across the different tenors and increasing interest payment obligations on accumulated debt. Now, let me turn to fiscal and structural challenges facing ASEAN+3 authorities, focusing on 4 key aspects. The first aspect that I'd like to highlight is that the fiscal position remained weak. In the left-hand side chart, the red triangle indicates the economies where the 2025 fiscal balance were worse than the pre-pandemic levels. The blue triangle indicates the economies where the 2025 fiscal balances were better than the pre-pandemic levels. So only 4 economies out of 14 our member economies, namely Laos, Japan, Singapore, and Vietnam, recorded stronger fiscal balance, while all other economies had weaker fiscal balance, either from lower revenue or higher expenditure, or both. So in Indonesia, although the expenditure has broadly returned to the pre-pandemic levels, revenue recovery has been lagging, resulting in the still elevated fiscal deficit. The right-hand side chart represents the differences in government debt and debt service between the pre-pandemic level and in 2025. All economies, except for Japan and Vietnam, are located in the first quadrant, meaning that the higher level in both debt outstanding and debt services. And in addition, according to our medium-term debt projections, the path toward debt stabilization is very gradual. That means it could slow or even revert if any downside risk materialize. So taken together, these first aspects underscore the importance of continued efforts to ensure the fiscal sustainability. And the second aspect is that the near-term economic uncertainty remains persistent and elevated. ASEAN+3 economies were often commended for their effective fiscal responses to successive economic shocks since the pandemic, making use of their fiscal buffers they have accumulated in the earlier years. However, as a result of a series of fiscal responses, fiscal space or fiscal buffer narrowed. And as you can see from the left-hand side chart, so in most of the countries, the debt buffer or financing buffer, we call it as we measure it as a fiscal space, has narrowed in many countries. And at the same time, in the near term, uncertainty remains still high, particularly related to the tariff escalation and the volatile global energy prices associated with the ongoing Middle East conflict. The right-hand side chart shows the uncertainty index related to oil price and U.S. trade policy. While trade policy uncertainty peaked in 2025 and eased somewhat in 2026, the oil price uncertainty has intensified more recently, surging since March this year. So against this backdrop, it is critical to rebuild fiscal buffers to ensure that authorities contain sufficient capacity to respond to emerging. The third aspect is that member authorities face growing demands on fiscal policy, even when they need to rebuild fiscal buffers. As you may know, fiscal policy has three core functions: stabilizing the economy and promoting growth and supporting income redistribution. And demand for these core functions are growing. In the near term, given high uncertainty, fiscal policy should remain flexible to help stabilize the economy and mitigate the adverse impact of the economic shocks. And at the same time, the fiscal policy should continue to promote growth and reduce poverty and income inequality. The left-hand side chart shows the potential growth trend in the region. So it has slowed and is expected to continue to moderating, mainly due to the weak capital formation, sluggish productivity gains, and in some economies, demographic constraints from population aging. The right-hand side chart shows the Gini index. So although extreme poverty has declined significantly in the region, income inequality remains wide. So in Indonesia, inequality remains relatively higher than other peers, and it has been widened somewhat over the past decade. So taken together, this implies that greater fiscal resources will be required to fulfill the three core functions of fiscal policy, and more resources will be required for this. And the fourth aspect is that, however, the fiscal revenue generation remains insufficient to meet these growing spending needs. And the budget structure has also become rigid. The left-hand side chart shows the fiscal revenue as a share of GDP. So compared with the peer income groups, fiscal revenue ratio in many ASEAN+ economies have remained relatively low over the past decades. And Indonesia's revenue to GDP ratio is particularly low compared with both regional peers and global income peers. On the expenditure side, spending structure has also become more rigid due to a rising public sector wage, expanding social security payment, and rising interest payment obligations. The right-hand side chart shows the interest to revenue ratio. So this ratio has increased in many economies, reaching around 20% in some cases. In other words, almost 1/5 of government revenue must be automatically paid for further interest, leaving fewer resources available other priority spending. And this highlights the need to strengthen both revenue mobilization and spending efficiency to continue to support the core fiscal mandates without endangering fiscal sustainability. So to address this structural and fiscal pressure facing the ASEAN+3 economies, AFPR 2026 highlights the overarching direction of strengthening fiscal management. The ultimate objective of fiscal policy is to support the resilient, inclusive, and sustainable growth. And to achieve this, fiscal policy play a key role, as I explained in the previous slide, in promoting economic growth through resource allocation, and reducing poverty and income inequality, and stabilizing economy through flexible responses to shock. So while fiscal policy focuses on this what to do, the fiscal management, more formally public financial management, focuses on how to do it. So in this context, the AFPR 2026 emphasized the importance of strengthening fiscal management on the how-to aspect to enable fiscal policy to achieve its core mandate. In particular, this report highlights 5 key areas: fiscal aggregate management, strategic resource allocation, efficient spending, resource mobilization, and systematic management of risk. The first, fiscal aggregate management should be strengthened. So establishing credible fiscal anchor is critical to guide the medium to long-term fiscal aggregates onto a sustainable path. So these anchors can be supported by fiscal rules and medium-term fiscal frameworks. The fiscal rules help define fiscal anchors in a more predictable and credible manner. The left-hand side table shows the fiscal rules already adopted in 9 member economies. And while these economies may consider refining their fiscal rules by incorporating desirable features, such as a predetermined escape clause and automatic correction mechanism after breaching the rule, and other economies without fiscal rules may consider introducing the new rules. And I would like also highlight that consistent implementation matters more than ambitious rule design, because repeated breaches of stringent rules can undermine fiscal credibility. The right-hand side table shows the medium-term fiscal framework published in and also in 9 member economies. The medium-term fiscal framework further translates the long-term fiscal anchor set by the fiscal rules into a more operational medium-term fiscal target for key aggregates such as revenue, expenditure, balance, and government debt. So Indonesia has generally adhered to its fiscal rules, maintaining the fiscal deficit below 3% of GDP and government debt below 60% of GDP, except during the pandemic period. And second, once the fiscal aggregates are set by fiscal aggregate management, within this fiscal envelope, public resources should be allocated strategically in line with the national priorities. If the priority is to promote growth, resource allocation should focus on sectors that can enhance productivity and expand the physical and human capital, such as infrastructure, education, and R&D. If the priority is to reduce poverty and income inequality, resources should be directed toward the strengthening social protection systems. And also, this resource allocation can support structural formation and economic diversification to enhance the economic resilience to shocks. And it can also help turn long-term challenges like a population aging and climate change into opportunities for sustainable growth. So for example, the fiscal measures can support active labor market policies such as upskilling and reskilling of the elderly and job matching services to mitigate the adverse effect of the population aging. And fiscal measures can also promote silver industries and facilitate the renewable energy as a new growth engine. And third, raising spending efficiency is critical to maximize the impact of limited fiscal resources, essentially improving value for money. So while the second pillar focuses on a allocative of efficiency, this pillar emphasizes the implementation efficiency at the program and project level. The bottom charts illustrate the efficiency gap in infrastructure, health, and education spending across member economies. The x-axis shows the inputs, basically fiscal spending, and the y-axis represents the outcomes. So the red solid line represents the efficiency frontiers given each input, and the vertical distance from this efficiency frontier line indicates the efficiency gap. You can see in many countries they have an efficiency gap in these 3 categories of spending. And this spending efficiency can be improved by embedding performance management throughout the budget cycle, including setting the key performance indicator and conducting regular spending review, and establishing the effective feedback group into the budget formulation. It is also important to strengthen the public investment management, particularly in the economies with the large infrastructure gaps. For more effective and efficient budget execution, institutional foundations should also be strengthened, such as procurement, cash management, and service delivery. So in Indonesia, in the context of Indonesia, particular attention could be given to rationalizing broad-based subsidies toward more targeted subsidies through spending review and evaluation. It is also important to enhance the effectiveness of social assistance programs by improving the accuracy of beneficiary identification. And fourth, revenue enhancing measures should be pursued in a comprehensive and durable manner. The 2 charts on the left shows the tax productivity and efficiency, which refer to how effectively tax revenue is collected relative to the intended tax base and statutory tax rate. The low productivity and efficiency imply sizable tax gaps, which need to be addressed through three main approaches. First, tax administration should be strengthened. The right-hand side chart shows the tax administration assessment based on the World Bank survey. In particular, Indonesia scored relatively low in operational efficiency of tax system in practice due to the kind of lengthy tax dispute resolution process. And tax administration could be improved by leveraging digitalization, such as e-filing, e-invoicing, digital payments, while also establishing some data sharing framework with other government, with the various government databases and financial intermediaries to capture income sources more accurately and comprehensively. And second, tax incentives and exemptions, which are widely used in the region, should be managed more rigorously to reduce the tax-based erosion. This should begin with the transparent disclosure of up-to-date inventory of tax incentives and regular reporting of tax expenditure to measure foregone revenue due to these tax incentives and exemptions. And life cycle management from introduction to termination should also be strengthened through a rigorous cost-benefit analysis and predetermined sunset clauses. So finally, durable structural reforms to major taxes should be considered, aligned with the evolving economic structures and global standards, such as the global minimum tax framework. And lastly, macroeconomic and fiscal risks should be managed more systematically. So given this uncertainty has become more persistent rather than just a one-time event. So given this persistent uncertainty, more systematic framework for fiscal responses are essential. So such a framework may include the contingency plans, which outline the potential risk scenarios and identifying the sectors and groups most vulnerable to the shock, and assess the economic impact, and finally preparing corresponding targeted policy measures. And also early engagement of key stakeholders like line ministries and National Assembly is also important to discuss the conditions and modality for fiscal responses and further strengthening the policy readiness and accountability. And transparent communication of fiscal responses and exit strategy also help strengthen the fiscal credibility. So once these temporary measures are introduced, the communication should be clear and when it will be end. And in terms of fiscal risks, the comprehensive management is important. The authorities should strengthen the identification, assessment, and disclosure of risks arising from various sources, and particular attention should be paid to liability arising outside the official budget coverage, such as subnational borrowing and off-budget entities. And contingent liabilities require systematic monitoring and proactive risk management, particularly those related to government guarantees, public-private partnership, SOE debts, also social insurance. Okay, yeah, this is for my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Byung-Hun Nam, for such an insightful presentation. As a token of appreciation, we would like to invite Mr. Gumilang Aryo Sahadewo, PhD, to present a souvenir to Mr. Byung-Hun Nam and Ms. Catherine Ko. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed to the panel discussion. This discussion will further explore several important issues, including the sustainability of ASEAN's current growth drivers, policy responses to near-term shocks, and the potential of deeper ASEAN integration in strengthening regional resilience. This panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. Dea Justicia, lecturer at the Department of Economics, Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Ms. Dea earned her bachelor's degree in economics from Universitas Gadjah Mada and completed her Master of Science in Economics at Tilburg University, the Netherlands. Her areas of interest include economic development, fiscal policy, and sustainability. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Ms. Dea Justicia.
Okay, good morning everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, it's almost good afternoon. So for distinguished guests, respected speakers and panelists, colleagues, students, and also participants joining us both in person and online. Yeah, as being introduced by our MC today, my name is Dea from the Department of Economics. It is such an honor for me to be the moderator for today's discussion, to further deepen our discussions and also to dig deeper about the topics today. So without the further ado, I will introduce our panelists for today. So for today, we are truly honored to be joined by distinguished panelists representing academia, regional economic institutions and experts, and also the policymaking authorities. So our first panelist is from academia. Please welcome Ibu Deni Puspa Purbasari from Fakulty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Okay, and for the second panelist, we will have Mr. Allen from AMRO, the group head and also the lead economist from AMRO. Please welcome Mr. Allen. Okay. I will change. Okay, for our third panelist, it will be Mr. Seung Hyun Ho, or Luke, the group head and also the lead economist from AMRO. And as the representative from the policymaking institution, we will have the representative from Bank Indonesia, Bapak Juli Budi Winantia, Director of Economic and Monetary Policy from Bank of Indonesia. Please welcome Pak Juli. In this panel session, there are two segments. The first one, we will be discussing about the economic uncertainty and also the ASEAN+3 resilience. And in the second segment, we will be discussing about the fiscal policy and also structural challenges. For the ground rule, I am as the moderator, will direct several questions to the specific panelists based on their respective expertise, although I will warmly welcome the reflections and also responses from all panelists throughout the discussion. As a moderator, I will also try to manage the timing to ensure there is sufficient room for audience interaction afterwards. So perhaps we may begin with the broader regional picture first. So we will be discussing about economic uncertainty and also the ASEAN+3 resilience. Okay, my first question I will address to the colleagues from AMRO. Okay. Based on the because we are the lecturers, Bu. We love making questions and asking questions. So students, okay, yeah, please don't be, yeah, please be relaxed. Okay, the first question is, from your perspective, especially AMRO, as the regional economic policy surveillance institution, given the today's increasingly uncertain global environment, do you believe the current growth in ASEAN and also the +3 regions, the drivers of the growth, remain sufficiently strong to sustain momentum going forward? Do you, to what extent, can the region continue relying on its existing growth model in today's increasingly fragmented global environment? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Budia. So I was in a panel with the Prime Minister of Malaysia and the Finance Minister of Malaysia last Friday, and I was not this nervous compared to today.
Sorry.
Just kidding. So, distinguished guests, mahasiswa, mahasiswi sekalian, ladies and gentlemen, selamat siang. It's such a pleasure for us to be in Jogja this morning, and it's a real deep privilege that we are in Universitas Gadjah Mada for AMRO. So on this question, I think it's important that we actually try to distinguish the two different time frames to address this question. In a sense, when it comes to growth driver, I think for the near-term growth prospect, the growth outlook for the region is really uneven. See, on the downside, there's a lot of downside risks when it comes to the Middle East conflict. That is one of the most salient risks that we are looking at. You know, we are looking at a situation in which things are deeply uncertain, and it has significant ramification for energy prices and also areas beyond that could affect the region's growth outlook and inflation at the same time. So it's a potential for stagflationary shock to the region. But beyond that, there's other further downside risks as well. So there is that risk of, you have to remember that the US tariff situation is not settled, right? In a couple of months' time, in July, the global import surcharge that currently in place, the 10%, would expire, and we would have a new set of tariff to replace that. We are not certain what those tariffs are. So that, again, inject a further element of uncertainty. And of course, the tech cycle, it's actually the other side of the unevenness, in the sense that now it's providing a very strong uplift to the economy. So in a way, when we look at the headlines, economic headlines that's coming out, so when you read a newspaper, it feels a bit schizophrenic in a sense. You read like, oh, this worst energy crisis that is hitting us, uncertainty, oil price hit all-time high, and so on. And then on the other hand, when data get released, you see exports all-time high, driven by the technology sector for all economies in ASEAN. So that is the unevenness of the current growth outlook, in the sense that the driver for our current growth is actually the tech sector. And it benefits many economies across the region. So it's not just isolated in one or two economies. And the issue with that is that the tech situation is also potentially a downside risk as well. If we see a correction, then the driver of growth in the region could be halted. So that is the near-term picture. So let me touch briefly on the longer-term picture. I think that's when the growth driver articulation is really important. I think it's not a matter of how strong the current existing growth model is for the region, for ASEAN, and also for the broader ASEAN region. It's actually how fast the region can adapt its growth model to the coming landscape that we are facing. So this is not from this year's REO that Catherine just presented. This was from last year's REO. I also encourage you to read that. It's in the chapter 3. We actually look at the long-term growth of this region, including ASEAN, as well as the growth driver for this region. I think what we need to, the key summary for that is that to move forward, we need to move away from capital accumulation, pure capital accumulation, to more productivity, more tech-driven kind of growth model that we rely more on innovation. And then on the other hand, we also need to make sure that the growth benefits the broader region and also the broader population. So the growth also will need to be inclusive. So I think that the task at hand for policymaker going forward is actually to ensure that we adapt to the deeply fragmented global environment, utilizing technology to improve our innovation, and also to make sure that the growth is actually inclusive. I'd love to elaborate, but I think I'm taking too much time already, so I'll just leave it here. Thank you so much, Ibu Dia.
Okay, thank you so much for Mr. Allen for the answer, especially about the inclusive growth. Yeah, that's the very good policy, but we know that the implementation must be difficult in reality. So for the second question, is also still about the economic uncertainty and also the resilience in ASEAN+3, still being addressed to the colleagues from AMRO. Yeah. There is also increasing discussion globally regarding the fragmentation, as you have mentioned, and also the strategic competition. If we talk about ASEAN today, do you think the integration of ASEAN today, the cooperation of ASEAN today, is progressing quickly enough or not to respond to the emerging challenges? And if not, which areas require the most urgent regional coordination based on AMRO's perspective?
Right. So let me just complement what Catherine has already presented. So I think our assessment is that based on our current economic fundamentals, the degree of integration in ASEAN is what it's supposed to be, right? But of course, ideally, we will want to see a situation in which there are denser interlinkages in ASEAN itself. And the areas that we think is really key for ASEAN that we should make more progress on is actually on really two fronts. The first one is the one that we try to highlight a lot more, which is actually intra-ASEAN investment. We tend to, if you go through all the documents from ASEAN, I think most of it focus on, when it comes to investment, most of it focus on how can we make ASEAN an investment destination for outside investment, right? How do we make ourselves attractive? And we have been very successful. We are one of the regions in the world in which we attract the most foreign inward FDI. Then the next step is to ask the question, how can we then move to the next level in which we can encourage our firms to invest more with each other? And this matters because FDI actually is what leads in further trade going forward. So we need to ask ourselves, what sectors can this happen? Doesn't really have to be purely manufacturing. It doesn't have to be high-tech manufacturing. It can be things like food processing. It can be like services. Services is a frontier that I think we should explore a lot more. But the point being is that we should try to look at the region itself as and this region has deep potential, right? In the sense the population is close to 700 million. And we have shown just now that the final demand source for this region is also growing. So it is a huge market itself. So that's one area, internationalization, intra-investment in ASEAN, particularly through internationalization of our firms. The other area that I think we need to work on, we didn't explore this as much, is actually resilience. I think we need to ask ourselves, how can we make this region, ASEAN, more resilient to shocks? And I think this comes to long-term resilience, not just short-term resilience in terms of like macro policy and so on. And I think we need to identify areas in which we try to build in redundancy, buffers, and stockpiles. It can be clearly the Strait of Hormuz episodes has reminded us why is it very important to have energy security, right? More diversified supply chain when it comes to our sources of energy. I think there are other elements that we need to look at as well. We should not forget that during the pandemic time, there was a lot of supply chain disruption as well. How do we make our supply chain more resilient? And then climate is another issue that we need to look into as well. And again, inclusion, right? That's actually a source of resilience. We can't be resilient if the broader population is not benefiting from growth and so on. So I think we need to address all these things. So resilience and closer investment in each other.
Thank you so much for the comprehensive answer, Mr. Allen. Such very much homeworks, actually.
The next question is still for me?
Yeah, no. Not yet. Okay. And as Mr. Allen has mentioned about the resilience, while discussions on ASEAN resilience are often framed at the regional level, global uncertainty ultimately translate into concrete domestic policy challenges for each economy, including Indonesia. In this context, the role of policymakers become increasingly important, not only in maintaining stability, but also in ensuring that growth remains sustainable in the middle of the far more uncertain global environment. So the next question, I will address it to our policymaker, Bapak Juli. So Pak Juli, from Bank Indonesia's perspective, how sustainable are Indonesia's current growth drivers, especially in the face of the turbulence of the economic uncertainty today?
Okay, thank you, Mbak Dea. First of all, I'd like to thank Universitas Gadjah Mada and also AMRO for having me here today. It's always a pleasure to go back and see mahasiswa and mahasiswi, right, Pak Roman? So, feels young again. So, on the question on the sustainable growth, I think if we take a longer-term perspective from time to time, the occurrence of the crisis or major shocks happen more frequently. 1998, we have a Asian financial crisis, and then 10 years afterward, we have a global financial crisis followed by another major shocks and crisis, sovereign debt crisis in Euro, and then COVID, etc., etc. So, but the region or the country with a strong domestic demand is in a better position to weather the crisis. As Catherine already mentioned, that ASEAN+3 is also in that position. But domestic demand itself is not enough. So having a good export competitiveness is also an advantage. I think the picture of Indonesia is more or less similar with the ASEAN+3. So we have a strong domestic demand, so that's why during the pandemic we were able to, although the growth remained negative, but the contraction remained relatively benign compared to other countries, and we've been able to recover fast because we have a strong domestic demand. And then we're in the process of to make our exports more competitive, to create more value added to the economy. The measures that the government is taking is by downstreaming the main export commodity like the nickel, CPO, etc. So that also one of the factors behind the Indonesia's economic resiliency. And also, Catherine and Alan mentioned about the FDI. FDI is also important, both from the investment, from foreign investment and also domestic investment, not only to the capital-intensive sector, but also to the labor-intensive sector, so that a sector that could create employment could also benefit from this investment. So having a strong economic structure is the key to have a resilient growth going forward. That's the one factor. Another important factor is maintaining stability. That's where the Bank Indonesia has played a more important role in that. So stability in terms of the price, which is reflected in inflation, and then stability of the exchange rate, and also stability in the financial sector, where we also collaborate with other policymaker, with the Minister of Finance, with the FSA, and also with the deposit insurance institutions. So that kind of coordination, so to make sure that the stability remain in place is also the foundation of having the economic growth sustainability going forward. So strong economic structure and also the maintaining the sustainability, maintaining the stability.
Thank you so much, Pak Julie. You have mentioned about the strong economic foundation and structure and also the stability, but we know that in the macroeconomics, especially today, there are many shocks, especially external shocks. So my question, from Bank Indonesia, as the monetary policy-making institution, how should policymakers respond to the near-term external shocks while also still preserving macroeconomic resilience and also the public confidence itself, Pak?
The economic is becoming more complex, increasingly complex. So the interaction between among sectors, the interaction among regions, and also among the policy domain is getting more intense. And the challenge is becoming more multidimensional. So what we learned from the crisis is that we cannot use a single instrument to address many challenges. So that's why we in Bank Indonesia, after the crisis, implemented what we call the policy mix. So we don't only use policy rate to address the multiple challenges that we have, but we use other policies. So in addition to monetary policy, we have a microprudential policy in payment system, and other supporting policy in the financial market, inclusive growth, etc., etc. So in monetary policy itself, so we don't only use the interest rate, but we also complemented it with the policy in the liquidity aspect. So we may raise the interest rate to stabilize the currency, but at the same time we can also inject the liquidity to the market if we consider that the current economic growth remain below potential, and we can push the economic growth further without compromising growth. So basically, that's the policy mix that we've taken, and also other policies in macroprudential policy where we come up with the policies to give banks incentive for banks that provide credit to the priority sector. We give incentive by reducing their reserve requirement in Bank Indonesia. So that kind of policy mix helps to be able to address the multiple challenges that the Indonesia face. And that should be also complemented with better policy coordination and synergy with other policymakers. So should be move in line, in tandem with other policy.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pak Julie, for the comprehensive answer regarding the perspective from policymaking. From the last but not least in this segment, I will address the question to Ibu Deni from the perspective of academia. So we have discussed the macroeconomic and also policy dimension of uncertainty. However, uncertainty today is also increasingly experienced socially, particularly among the younger generations. So in broader picture, my question is, if we compare the ASEAN economies today with the conditions a decade ago, what feels fundamentally different this time?
Okay, but before I answer your questions, first of all, I would like to congratulate AMRO team for wonderful reports that you just released, last month, right? In April, right? And 2 questions. Number one, is it really a research on ASEAN+3 or is it about Indonesia? Because it rhymes a lot and it's all actually very relevant for Indonesian situation. So, yeah, suspicious, like, oh, maybe the weights about Indonesia is quite significant, but well, I'm just joking. The second question, have you presented these reports to our Indonesian government, like MOF or maybe DEN already? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Hopefully, yeah, with your evidence, your reports, it will basically give a better perspective, like how to manage the Indonesian macroeconomy. And before I came to this stage, I checked my cell phone to check like, oh, what happened to the stock market? Of course, it's red, and it's actually foreign capital outflows is 2.2 trillion rupiah, but before I answer your questions, it's already 3.2 trillion rupiah. So that's the situation, and also rupiah itself, depreciating even more, not in a good shape. So it's actually very, appropriate time, correct time, really timely that we discuss about this, because I think it's not late yet to make a significant correction in the trajectory of our economic policies. So to answer your questions, well, I think what's different, we are not in, simplified bad cycle, meaning that interest rate and also the commodity price cycle, from low to high, and then interest rate, the same thing. But we are in the different age, as mentioned by AMRO team. In the past, our model is about globalization, multilateralism, innovation, yes, low-cost production, and also more predictable external demand. But current model is different. It is about fragmentation, resilience, strategic competition, climate, and also technology. So our challenge right now, I think, is not only how to make ASEAN growth faster or can be resilient, but what kind of development model that work when uncertainties persistent. So when I mentioned about bad cycles, yes, some actually the cyclicality is uncertain, namely the commodity price and also the interest rate. But something that is fundamental actually already shift, structural change. And what kind of structural change underneath the supply and demand in this region that is different right now? Of course, fragmentation, geopolitics becomes the issue. Second, demography. Third, climate, because how many typhoon or whatever, bad weather or floods coming to the region? It requires significant amount of fiscal buffer. And then third, of course, I already mentioned technology or not, I forgot, technology. And not only that, again, this is about how to manage the change in the demand. Because demand, I think, is no longer like in the previous decade, but right now, demand is kind of tilted, toward, particular sector, especially for Indonesia. As mentioned by AMRO, we are more concentrated, and that's not good because, again, what we are needed at this time is not just the inclusive growth in the region, but inclusive growth even within Indonesia. because imbalances in Indonesia, is actually very significant. So it's like we are facing not only, headwinds with the global economy, not only how to manage the integration within the region, but also inside Indonesia. So that's to answer your question.
Okay, thank you, Bu Deni. Maybe Mr. Allen want to answer from the question from Bu Deni first. Can you elaborate more? Yeah.
So I guess there's a lot of, in terms of whether this is about Indonesia or whether it's about the region, I think because Indonesia in many ways, well, first of all, Indonesia is the most important, largest economy in ASEAN. So in many ways, but beyond that, there's a lot of commonalities across our economies. So and then there are a lot of priorities and that policymakers can focus on. So and it applies to Indonesia as well, which is why and of course we try to cater the presentation a bit more to Indonesia as well. So on the point whether we presented it, yes, we have presented it to Bank Indonesia, we have presented to IMO, and yesterday we were at DAN as well. So I think, but maybe what we can do better is actually present it in a way that is. I'm not sure how persuasive we are. Let's put it that way. So you can talk, right? Whether the other party is listening, it's a different thing. So anyway, let me stop here. So.
Thank you so much for AMRO for answering the question and also the hard work for explaining to Dan and others. Okay, and the last question in this segment, also again to Bu Deni. Yeah. So still about economic uncertainty, so many people today are increasingly concerned about economic uncertainty, especially the younger generation, Bu. There are many uncertainty from employment opportunities and also AI disruption to housing affordability and inequality. From your perspective as academia, Bu, what should policymakers prioritize to ensure that the growth remains not only stable statistically, but also inclusive socially?
Yeah, because it becomes very relevant when we knew that the first quarter growth is 5.6% and people do not really feel it. So the job here is, number one, to ensure that growth is actually distributed among all members in the society. Because statistics show that real wage for employees actually only increased by 2%. If I'm not mistaken, 2.2% only. So while consumption in the first quarter increased by 5.5%. So where actually, the growth in consumption comes from? Assuming that the statistics accurate, then it means that there is a member of the society, and that's not employees, actually enjoy the largest jump in income, and therefore they can consume a lot. The second hypothesis is maybe the majority of society actually trapped into borrowings to support the consumption. But again, that means intertemporal, right? It means that growth cannot be sustained in the future. So, and of course, this debt trap is very dangerous for Indonesian society. So what's the job of the government? Number one, of course, look at the fiscal policies, because this is very important to focus on the fiscal policy, because that's actually the one that is controllable. Pak Julie, yeah, you're safe. You're safe. So a lot of homework is actually from fiscal policy, namely, number one, to improve the efficiency of the allocation. We know that we put too much resource and pull a lot of resources out from other allocation to government priority programs. And still, we know that, it actually creates unintended consequences. We know about the crowding out, we know about, maybe limited fiscal multiplier from that allocation. And number two, of course, with such amount of spending, which is not accompanied by, revenue mobilization, then that actually will create significant trap, namely the risk of, fiscal sustainability. And in this, headwinds, it is very dangerous that we do not have enough significant, fiscal buffer. And Indonesia in the ring of fire, and also because of the El Nino is coming, it is very dangerous again, because if we do not have enough fund, the government do not have enough money, then how actually can help the society, even to give, for example, additional layer of protection, social protection when, bad things happen to Indonesian economy. And third, as you mentioned about the FDI, Indonesia is not really good in attracting FDI, because a lot of FDI goes to the neighboring countries. But what happened here is that also the quality of FDI itself, and I think we are not completely successful in leveraging this FDI that already in Indonesia to increase our productivity. And that's why, good jobs, decent jobs, actually not much in Indonesia. Research in the World Bank showed that which one that actually create, or becomes the reason behind low productivity in Indonesia and low wage in Indonesia. Is it more on the supply side or demand side of the labor market? World Bank argued that it is more on the demand side, namely not enough new firms established in Indonesia. Why is that? Because of business climate that is not good in Indonesia. Certainty in Indonesia is very low. Rule of law is very low. And right now, what we've seen, from the speech of Mr. President, it is so unfortunate that if export is very important to support rupiah, then the policy of FX export proceeds and all that should be allocated in government banks. That's what I heard. That should be allocated in Himbara or government banks. That's actually give a wrong signal to competition policy in Indonesia. Because in Indonesia, Himbara is only for banks, while there are so many private banks, including the foreign banks in Indonesia. And because this is about export proceeds, then it is actually also give a bad signal for our businesses, whether that's foreign businesses or local businesses who do exports, because then their cash flow, their flexibility to basically use the export earnings actually no longer like in the past. And the establishment of the Badan Export or the SOE, whatever initiative, that actually also hit hard to our exporters. Even though we understand that government needs tax revenue and integrity must be in our economy in order to increase or mobilize revenue, but it should be done in the more a predictable manner. So I think that's the homework of the government, and of course improve the social protection system. Pak Elan, I think, knew a lot about this, how actually we can improve also the system of protection in Indonesia. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bu Deni, for the very deep analysis of Indonesian economic condition and also as well as the recommendations. We will continue to the second segment of our discussion today regarding the fiscal policy and also structural challenges. So, as have been mentioned by AMRO today, many economies has implemented extraordinary fiscal expansion during the pandemic period. While those measures were necessary, policymakers today are now confronted with a much more difficult balancing act, from rebuilding fiscal space while also still maintaining growth, supporting recovery, and also responding to rising social and developmental demands. So in this segment, we will be discussing specifically on fiscal policy challenges and also the reform priorities across ASEAN economies, including Indonesia. So as the first question is regarding the fiscal sustainability. I will address this question to the colleagues from AMRO. We know that there are many discussions regarding the public debt that often focus primarily on the size of the debt itself. How concerned should we be about rising debt service burdens in the region, especially Indonesia? Is the bigger challenge today the size of debt itself or the declining flexibility of fiscal policy or the others? Okay, please, colleagues from AMRO.
Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank UGM for hosting this event. It is a very nice opportunity for AMRO to share our research output with the wide group of excellent researchers. Regarding the question, let me put it in a few different ways. The debt to GDP ratio is something that is very important, but in economic terms or statistical terms, it's not sufficient statistic. So that it has a lot of other varieties that we need to look into to, as a surveillance unit, to look into the fiscal health of member economies. So that's why Dr. Nam presented not only the debt to GDP ratio, but also the gross financing need. But that's not the whole story. As a surveillance unit, we look at the various aspects of the something that is related to fiscal situation. It includes for example, the short-term debt ratio, which is related to the financing side of that one, and also the FX composition, so foreign currency debt, which is another factor, and so on. So all those measures are actually related to what our history talk about that one. So if you take a look at the 20 or 30 years of history of those countries with the fiscal crisis, it never started from the higher debt. But usually the trigger comes from the other sources. It could be like the sudden, the large size of depreciation or sudden change in the global market, financial market condition that caused the trouble in terms of refinancing activities and so on. So all those activities are actually related, all those our lessons coming from the history is related to some of the factors that you just mentioned. Whether the fiscal the higher interest payment burden is more important than others. It is quite the situation specific. So when the macroeconomic or financial situation changes over time, some of the vulnerabilities could be more critical compared to the others. That's why as a surveillance unit, we try to look into various aspects, even including some of the institutional strengths as well. So more detailed assessment about our, the AMRO's assessment about the fiscal health can be found in the annual consultation report, because AFPR is more focused on some common features of member economies. We look at only a few different aspects, but if you look at the country report, including the Indonesia country report, you will see more diverse indicators that we are looking at, which is can be more relevant in certain situations, and then that is usually captured in the discussion part of the policy discussion part of the report. So yeah, let me answer that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So to diagnose the fiscal health in a country, it cannot be one size fits all. Okay. It will relate to the second questions about the fiscal indicators. So from AMRO perspective, what indicators do you believe actually matter most today when assessing fiscal health or fiscal sustainability in emerging economies?
Yeah, it is a little bit hard to say what is most relevant because we look at the different features, but anything that would like to highlight as relate to the core parts. So we start fiscal analysis starting from the revenue and expenditure side. So we'd like to look into that only the fiscal aggregate numbers, and we would like to look into the composition as well. So that's where we would like to point out the higher rigidity in the spending part, and also the revenue mobilization challenges. That's something that we are looking into very seriously. And some of the parts that we'd like to highlight as well is that not only the coverage of this core, I mean, even if we start from the core parts, we would like to highlight the importance of expanding the view of the fiscal monitoring. So not only of course, the budgetary document is the most important part, but we would like to look into the non-budget sources of liability. That's something that Dr. Nam mentioned about the fiscal risk. Fiscal risk management is one of the key things related to assessment of the fiscal health. And then what kind of fiscal risk that we need to look into? The first dimension is the cross-sectional dimension in the sense that, not only the official documents, we need to look into the beyond that one, like a contingent liabilities. It's quite country-specific. Some countries, they try to not put in the social insurance liability into the public discussion, while it is continued to increase. So that is one part. Or like a local government borrowings, there is no strong institution to control that one. In that case, it is another relevant one. So cross-sectional widening of the view is one part. The other thing that is possibly more relevant to the developing economies, including Indonesia, is that the time horizon. So as the fiscal system gets richer and also getting expanded, the one of the key aspects that need to be strengthened is that to increase the time horizon of the fiscal the perspective in decision making, because of the rigidity that is created during this fiscal expansion process. It always relevant that current decision making have a longer term implication, not only the expenditure but also the revenue side as well. So if you just remain on the 1 year or even 3 years, becomes less relevant, and then this implication have usually the fiscal policy decision making at this point have a longer term implication, even 10 years or 30 years. That's some of the institutional strengthening need to happen in the process of the fiscal development.
Thank you so much for the discussion about the fiscal policy from the regional surveillance institution. Before we continue our discussion, I would like to inform if the participants here, the colleagues here have the questions, we will conduct the Q&A session after the panel session. And also for the online participants, you can specifically address your questions in the designated platforms, for example, in Zoom or YouTube. So mention the question and to whom it should be addressed as well. Okay, thank you. And yeah, we will continue our discussion again about the fiscal policy. Okay, the next question still to AMRO about the fiscal inequality. But not fiscal justice, just fiscal inequality across the ASEAN+3. So based on the reports, we can see that there is many gaps in the fiscal capacity across ASEAN economies. Some economies possess the stronger fiscal buffers and also the financing capacity, while the others remain more constrained. How concerned should policymakers be about widening fiscal inequality within the region, particularly in the face of future shock and also long-term structural challenges?
The inequality of the fiscal positions across member economies is a little bit tricky question. What is the linkage between among the different the member economies? Is especially on the fiscal side, is less clear compared to the financial side. Financial linkages are a lot better developed, and also the transmission channel is a lot clearer compared to fiscal side. So let me try to answer that in another way. For example, how the fiscal policy can coordinate across member economies to strengthen the overall resilience of the region. There are a few avenues. For example, in terms of the spending side, there are many regional initiatives to improve the regional connectivity and also region-wide resilience. One of the example will be probably the relate to the Mekong River. So Mekong River is going through many member economies of AMRO, and then they have a common interest to make the Mekong River resources more productive, and at the same time to make the climate change less destructive related to this water resources. So the countries in that region try to have a common initiative where the fiscal capacity of the neighboring countries become an issue, and then that has direct implication. In addition, the regional connectivity through the highway construction that connects different member economies, also the power connection across different member economies. Those are some of the areas that member economies try to strengthen the cooperation, but fiscal capacity can be actually one of the constraints that may delay or sometimes become a big constraint to actually start that one. On the revenue side, the compliance is one of the areas that many member economies can collaborate to improve their the collaboration that will generally improve the compliance of each member economies. So that, for example, like the standardization of the duty form will greatly facilitate the regional trade, which is have the room for taxing the tax authorities to properly assess and then tax properly, and at the same time share the sharing of the financial information and then tax liability information across member economies also improve the compliance, tax compliance of the taxpayers in each region, regardless of where your business is. So that what matters is that in the past, that lack of coordination actually creates some of the opportunities or the loopholes, basically. But now it creates some of the clarity for the businesses in terms of promoting the FDI. So whenever the local firm, for example, in Indonesia, try to establish their factories in Cambodia, for example, what kind of the liability, tax liabilities they need to negotiate with the tax authorities and so on. Now, with the stronger coordination and then information sharing mechanisms in place, they will have a better understanding and then clarity about their business decisions. How, based on those information, they can make better decision making and so on. So not exactly in terms of the fiscal capacity across member economies, that will become the environment that will create the bigger or better the platform for the greater integration in this region.
Thank you so much, Mr. Luke, for the great explanation about multilateral cooperation in international tax as well, international fiscal capacity. For the next questions, it's not about the technical discussion again, but also I will ask the broader question regarding the role and expectation increasingly placed upon the fiscal policy today. So, yeah, now from the perspective of academia, Bu Deni. Yeah. Okay. The question is about the expanding expectation of fiscal policy. From your perspective, has the role of fiscal policy perhaps become too ambitious or not, particularly for emerging economies like Indonesia, with relatively limited revenue capacity here?
Specifically about Indonesia, yes. It is too ambitious if we compare with our capacity to mobilize revenue. Yeah, but I totally understand that the demand for fiscal policy is actually really high. In Indonesia, we need fiscal policy to support, like, for example, improving productivity, education, health, infrastructure, and so many things, including social protection. But again, if we look at the tax revenue, it's actually very limited, and there is no significant progress except the core tax. And we know that government tried to do significant efforts in order to boost tax revenue, but it has to be done in a very predictable manner. And like Luke already explained, I think with international collaboration with neighboring countries, we can learn how actually we tackle the issue of under-invoicing or, for example, transfer pricing. Because again, to tackle certain problems, there are different ways. Some ways actually very costly to the business. Well, we need business to create good jobs. We need business confidence to basically improve. Because if we look at Kontan CEO Index released in April to predict about CEO confidence in the second quarter, we are actually in the territory that is equivalent to during COVID period. So the confidence of CEO the same as during COVID. This is not good. And of course, with the external headwinds that happen in the Middle East, then we know that businesses actually delay making investment and also delay doing hiring. And that's not good for Indonesian, well, when we have demographic dividends. How actually Indonesia manage this? Well, focus on spending efficiency, because with limited fiscal space, I think improving expenditure quality is as important as increasing fiscal quantity. So and again, understanding the trade-offs that some of the priority programs need to be scaled down and more focused, more targeted to the neediest ones rather than do it universally. Because again, we need fiscal buffer and we need to do more in other areas, including infrastructure, human capital development, and so on, that equip our young citizens to prepare for the change in the work, change in the jobs, and that's actually also requires significant amount of money. We know that. So, because what I'm afraid is that the disappointments might accumulate, and that's not good during this global turbulence that's happening right now. And looking at the depreciation of rupiah or whatever happened in stock market, we know that Indonesia performance is actually far below than the region or the peers average or even global average. That means that there is a domestic issues that become the reason behind it. There is a country-specific issues. So we cannot just simply blame the external situations to whatever happened in Indonesia. And actually what Luke mentioned, that fiscal crisis, you mentioned crisis, yeah, that's actually typically comes from the financial sector, whether that's extreme depreciations or whatever that happened in the liquidity market that is basically gone. So of course we can borrow if investors, number one, still have money, number two, have confidence, have preference, and the yield is actually good compared to the rest of the world. But if we offer higher yield, then it will actually bring to the debt burden in the future. Servicing becomes very expensive and tax revenue is not enough. So that's become like a circle of, bad things that happen in Indonesia economy. It needs to be cut, and the one that is controllable is actually by cutting and focusing more on the productive expenditure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bu Deni.
I know that I know that audience will have questions, but when Luke mentioned about longer period and seeing about the fiscal policies, then the challenge here is that the longer the period is, we are talking about multi-political administration, and maybe there is a time inconsistency there. Maybe one administration will create burden to another, or even the opposite. So how what is your, I don't know, best advice for this? And the second thing, when you mentioned about off-balance sheet or contingency plan, that sound to be typical in the regions, but in Indonesia, when I see, you know, off-balance sheet spendings, what I'm thinking is actually fiscal discipline deteriorates. So how to ring fence that the usage of off-balance sheet is actually still within the framework of fiscal discipline?
Thank you for your question. It is a very important one. I mentioned about the gradual development of the fiscal policy. And then as the fiscal policy, the first step is getting the annual budget right, and then fiscal annual management right. Once they do that, then the next step is that they need to think about how to incorporate the future decision making, future implication of the current decision making into the current decision making. So that's where the information transparency becomes really important. So for those countries at the early stages, they usually do not, basically they are not able to produce the relevant information or reliable projection of their decision-making behavior, implication, fiscal implication of their decision-making. Therefore, it becomes really hard and they make mistake over and over again until they realize that. So, learning from those experiences, we also already know that the main source of the spending rigidity that we found in the among member economies was the wage, public sector wage increase was one thing. And then you repeatedly mentioned of the social protection spending. Those things are more, how should I say, reliably can project it going forward, in the medium term, 5 year, 10 year. And also interest payments, it is more or less like it is fixed. Of course, how to finance in the future is something that matters as well. And then that will require more reliable medium-term debt management plan as well. So those missing information will require additional components to make the projection more reliable. So all this information need more transparency, and then all the decision-making need to take into this account. So when the National Assembly have a discussion about, oh, let's try to change social protection law in this way or that way, they need to think about they are required to present what will be their what is the fiscal implication of their alternatives, so that this open discussion is actually the institutional improvement that will force the decision makers to make the right decision. So even if we do not have this transparent information and then discussion if that is not established, then that will risk the instability of the system over different administration cycle. So even if the administration changes, the information itself will not change that much. Of course, there is just room for the discretion about the future growth projection and so on, but it doesn't change the true reality of the things. So that's what we are talking about in terms of this expanding our time horizon in the fiscal decision making. That's one thing. About the off-budget issues, all member economies have different fiscal system. It is basically depend on their history and the social system and political system and so on. So ideally, one of the ideal position is a single treasury account, so that all government revenues should go here and then everything should come out from there, so that everything is under the control of very clear, like a National Assembly decision and so on. But the true reality is that some of the specific type of spending require the separate funds and so on. The question is that how to bring all these extra, like satellite accounts, into the same table when we discuss the whole fiscal decision making at the same time. So the key problem that I just mentioned is that this contingent liability, for example, it is relatively new. When I say relatively new, is that it's not like 1 or 2 years. In the fiscal, the cycle is very slow, so that probably like a couple of decades. How to deal with the contingent liability? Because it doesn't appear in the budget, it doesn't appear in the the national balance even among the OECD countries, so that they decide, after years of experience that, realization of contingent liability can be a big issue for fiscal situation. So they try to come up with the guidelines of how to reflect that one in their decision making. For example, social security, social insurance liability is one big thing, but national pension liability is not technically government debt. Then is it okay to change the benefit level, disregarding all this government, the implication in 30 years or 40 years? It is not. Therefore, the updated guideline is to try to incorporate that as a note, additional addendum note in the national, the public sector balance sheet. So something like that. So additional information about these things when they make the key decision making is something that becomes very important. Not only the regular at the time of decision making, but also regular monitoring becomes a very important part. So that's why we highlight that fiscal risk, all those factors can be the source of fiscal risk, should be well identified and then assessed and then disclosed, so that the policymakers, not only policymakers, but also the public in general. As you understand, fiscal policy, about 70% or even more are politics. And how to force the policymakers, or sometimes they are equivalent to politicians, to make the right decision. So that's when the fiscal literacy of the public become very important. For fiscal literacy of the public, you need the better information. The transparency, disclosure of the information, and so on. Those parts are something that should be forced by the institution. And then that's how the fiscal institution need to develop as time goes by. Thank you.
Thank you, because I think many of us think about the high-speed train and also SOE, and the latest one is Danantrara. So it makes us, all of us, quite nervous. But thank you for your explanation. Thank you. Sorry, dear. Thank you.
So, okay, Bu Deni, thank you so much for the very engaging question. The engaging discussion. So the next question is about the monetary and also fiscal coordination to Pak Juli. So from Bank Indonesia's perspective, we know that sometimes monetary and also fiscal policy authorities may naturally operate with different priorities of time horizons, Pak. For example, fiscal authorities may focus more on supporting growth and social protection, for example. On the other hand, central banks might prioritize price stability and also macroeconomic credibility. From Bank Indonesia's perspective, in practice, how are those differences usually managed?
Okay, thank you, Mbak Dea. Pak Rahman, want to try to answer it? Mas Wahyu? Mas Wahyu? Yeah, I think I can put it in this current situation based on Bank Indonesia assessment. From Bank Indonesia assessments that the inflation, we believe that the inflation this year and next year will remain in check, stay within the target. Growth is above average compared to other countries, but we believe that this current number still below its potential, meaning that we can push growth further without compromising the stability of the price, and currently there's the pressure on the rupiah. So Bank Indonesia's policy makes always based on three main considerations: the inflation, the stability of the exchange rate, and then also, if possible, if the stability is could be maintained, we also support growth. So the policy mix that I've mentioned before is that because currently we focus on stabilizing the rupiah. So that's why on the last board meeting, we raised the policy rate by 50 basis points. So, but before that, we already raised the interest rate, the yield of the SRBI. That's the Bank Indonesia Securities as a monetary instrument. So current focus is on stability. But because we see that the growth still below its potential, so we also provide liquidity. So it's not only about the interest rate, but we also provide liquidity to the system we have a expansionary monetary operation, and we also buy the government bond in the secondary market. So that's also providing liquidity to the market. So that's from the monetary side. And also, we have a macroprudential policy side. So I mentioned earlier in the first session that we give incentives for banks that channel credits to the priority sectors in the form of the reduction of the reserve requirement, maximum of 5.5%. So for banks that provide credit to the priority sectors, to the micro, small, medium enterprise, so maximum they could get a reduction of 5.5% in reserve requirement. So under current circumstances, so because we learned from the crisis that we cannot use the single instruments to deal with the many challenges. So that's the policy mix from Bank Indonesia. In addition to that, we also have the forum. We have a close coordination, not only in the principal level, where the governor meet with the Minister of Finance, the head of the FSA, and also the head of the deposit insurance institution. But in deputies level and also in technical level, we also have a regular discussion on that. So things like the policies to maintain the stability is always discussed there. How to promote growth, what's the policy is going to be taken by each institution is also discussed there. It doesn't mean that we compromise the independence of each institution, but that's the form of the coordination and the policy synergy that fortunately we have here in Indonesia. Right, Pak Roman? How are you?
Thank you, Pak Julie, for the insightful explanation. So because of, we already offsite actually, so for the next session, I will give the opportunity for the participants. If you have the questions to our panelists or speakers. I think,
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I'm from Treasury Regional Office of Jakarta, Ministry of Finance. From the presentation of Ms. Catherine, we know that the ASEAN+3 covers 27.2% of GDP volume in global perspective. Okay, global world. So, is there any perspective from the AMRO for the next 2 decades of ASEAN+3? How will increase the coverage of our GDP upon the global GDP? Because people say, I think the expert says that this century is Asian century. So I think the Asia should be the leaders in this economy. And the second one, some researchers also confident that Indonesia in the next 2 decades will become fourth biggest economy in the world. Yeah, I think. But according to the presentation or AMRO's presentation, that Indonesia has the lowest tax ratio in among our economy, ASEAN plus, especially. So, how your perspective or your confidence that Indonesia will become the fourth biggest economy in 2 decades, the next 2 decades? Maybe you have perspective from your research. I think that's all my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bapak namanya izin? Oh, ya. Pak? Oh, Pak Tauhid. So the first question is from Pak Tauhid. I think it should be addressed to
Alan. I can throw the mic to catch it. I think one of the what we showed just now, the 27.5, is actually the final demand source of the global exports. So we in the region collectively, ASEAN with the +3 now is the largest source, bigger than even the US, and one of the key drivers of this is actually the continued growth of our development of our economies. China was growing very fast, developing a lot. So, for example, the GDP per capita for China in year 2000 was 1,000 plus. Now it's about close to 14,000 USD. But beyond that is actually also ASEAN. ASEAN has also grown very fast in the last 2 decades. So which is why given that the population has become richer, the region itself become a key source of consumption as well as investment. So we are also projecting going forward based on the current trajectory for the region, ASEAN especially, to grow faster than the rest of the world in the near future. We actually have a projection to 2050 in our last year's report for the world, for the region. It will continue to grow faster than the rest of the world. So in that sense, I think we are, if this region continue to grow as such in the current trajectory, we would anticipate that the share of final demand of the global exports that goes into this region will continue to increase. That said, the growth rate has been slowing. I think Dr. Nam's presentation showed that our long-term growth rate is actually moderating. So the pace of increase would be slower going forward. The next question is on Indonesia. 2 decades. Academician.
This is about the prediction that Indonesia will be the fourth largest economy in the world. So how to make that? Well, actually, the capacity of the government tax revenue is limited. Well, number one, I don't know about that prediction, but my guess, maybe we are thinking about China, US, and also India. But in 2 decades, I doubt that if we actually maintain the current course, because the current course will not bring us to higher economic growth. That's my belief. And number two, but the picture is not entirely bleak, Pak. Like I said, it is not fatal yet. But again, the room for change is getting narrower, and we have to move quickly and change the course of economic policy. Because even though the government tax revenue is limited, and of course we need to improve tax or revenue mobilization in order to better serve to Indonesian society, but remember that investment is actually 88% contributed by the private sectors, namely the companies and also the households. Well, government, APBN, plus the SOE is actually only 12%, Pak. So what we really worried is that this is not about money, but this is about policy and regulation. If the policy and regulation from the government actually kills the incentive for the private sector to grow, that's become dangerous because the 88% of the eggs will broken. That's why no source of innovation, no source of productivity, no source of decent jobs, and then the future of Indonesian growth will be much slower. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for Alan and Budeni. Is there any questions again from the participant, maybe online?
Excuse me, Ms. Dea. We got one question from YouTube. Muhammad Saiful Fuad asks, what means deeper integration economic reliable in the face economic transformation impact for Indonesia fiscal policy in ASEAN regional economic community?
Thank you, Mbak Ika. Yeah, maybe for Luke. Ellen again. Call a friend, Budeni always.
I
remember that Catherine is of Alan, but Yunghun is Luke.
if I may ask for the repeat of the question again.
The fiscal book.
So Muhammad Saiful Fuad asks, what is the meaning of deeper integration economic reliable in the face economic transformation impact for Indonesia fiscal policy in ASEAN regional economic community?
So both of you then.
Yeah. It's for Luke.
Can you repeat the question? Not exactly sure what the question is about.
So, Muhammad Saiful Fuad asks, what is the meaning of deeper integration economic reliable in the face economic transformation impact for Indonesia fiscal policy in ASEAN regional economic community?
Impact of Indonesian fiscal policy for economic integration in ASEAN.
That's
maybe from your perspective, is there any experience or perspective or research about one big country or one economy like Indonesia conducting the fiscal policy and will give impact to the region as well?
As I mentioned in during the panel discussion, fiscal policy have limited the role in terms of promoting the regional perspective. So, but the way that I mentioned is that there can be an initiative, regional initiative, and then the fiscal policy can facilitate the implementation of the regional perspective within the territory of the government, with the territory of a specific country. For example, like a regional green initiative, probably Indonesian government and the fiscal policy, especially using the fiscal policy, can promote the implementation of the regional green initiative according to in line with the other member economies who have a common commitment about that one. And also the integration effort, like the Asian economic community, that will require a substantial decline in the duties when the trade is among the member economies. And then that will require the coordinated effort to reduce the duties in line with the agreements, as well as it will facilitate the additional effort to share the information and standardizing the information sharing framework that will greatly facilitate the process and so on. But I think it is a little bit different from the first step of the regional integration perspective. So what I would like to highlight is the fiscal policy can be a facilitator, but the regional integration perspective, how to read that one or how that will be strengthened is the work of Ellen.
So if I could, maybe we should clarify what the actual question is. But I think from Luke's perspective, I think, let me answer it from the other way around. I think what is the implication on closer regional integration? on the impact of potential spillover of fiscal policy to the broader ASEAN economic community. So I'm trying to reinterpret the question there. So I think our work has shown that now the region is actually more closely aligned. Our linkages are actually deeper and stronger. So what that implies is that economies in the region, their potential for spillover is now larger, right? So our business cycle are more synchronized now, right? So for example, it's not just the +3 economy, it's not just China's business cycle that affect us, it's also among us in ASEAN as well. So, and Indonesia is the largest economy in ASEAN. So there is that potential going forward, I think, especially if growth is continued to be such and if regional integration continues to strengthen, that there could be fiscal policy spill over to the rest of the region in terms of, say, if growth is improving or the framework is such that if there's a crisis and fiscal policy is there to make sure that there is no recession and so on, that could actually benefit the rest of the region as well. So that could be a positive spillover in that sense. So I think what we really need with closer integration is actually more regional dialogue on our each individual economic assessment and also more spillover analysis going forward.
Okay, thank you for thank you, Luke, and also Alan. I hope Muhammad Saiful Fuad are satisfied with the answer. Yeah, the name. Okay, is there any more questions? Oh, okay, Mas. Please mention the name and also institution.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Budi. I'm a student here in UGM. I would like to ask about the fact in Indonesia that we do have a deteriorating currency, right? From AMRO perspective, last week our president just said in the hearing with the parliament that we're gonna have this SOE for exporting to support export. How do you respond about that? Like, what's your suggestion? And because just like Bank Indonesia already tried to settle using the reserve we have, but we also have a deteriorating reserve as well. We already limit our personal handling of USD. Do you have any other suggestion to support our currency to gain a better value these days? I think that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mas Budi, for the question. So it's for AMRO?
Yes,
or,
AMRO,
okay.
AMRO.
Yeah.
We need foreign... we would like to have...
Can I pass it to Bei, please? So wait, the question is on the SOE or the how to...
The policy, because the SOE is formed to support export, so that we can have better, more foreign reserve. I think that's the purpose.
Right. So I think so we need more time to actually study what is actually proposed, and our team in AMRO, the Singapore team will be the Indonesian team will be. The Indonesian team who are currently in Singapore will be actually studying the proposed proposal that is being set forth. I think what is key here is that more generally, this is more general, it's not specific to the proposed establishment of the entity, is that what is really key for not just Indonesia, for I think economies in the region in general, is to make sure that under this environment of deep uncertainty and globally challenging environment, is to make sure that the investor, the climate for investor, the business friendliness of our individual economy is maintained. I think that's really key. So I think that would be my answer to your question for now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No. I'm not going to talk about the export institution. From Bank Indonesia perspective, you mentioned about the Bank Indonesia's effort to stabilize the rupiah using the reserve. But in addition to that, and I think it's also related to the discussion that we have here. So we also have initiatives which will stabilize the rupiah and also integrate the regional integration faster by using what we call the local currency transaction. So it reduces demand for import and also make us more insulate from the global shock, because maybe some of us already heard about the term dominant currency paradigm. So because even the trade is between Indonesia and Malaysia, as long as it's pricing in US dollar, so the currency depreciation is not gonna make your export more competitive because it's priced in US dollar. So by using the local currency transactions, the transaction between the two countries will become more efficient and also make the currency in every jurisdiction, in every country, more stable, because we don't use dominant currency anymore to import something from Malaysia, or Malaysia import something from Indonesia. So that's the initiative that we've been working on. Currently we have a LCT initiative with the Malaysia, China, Thailand, and also Singapore, if I remember it correctly. So that's the initiative that we are going to expand. And Bank Indonesia also enriched their monetary instrument, not only providing spot and swap in US dollar, but also provide monetary instrument in other currency. So Japanese yen, Chinese yuan. So we also provide that monetary instruments to facilitate the local currency transaction. Hope it helps.
So yeah, because I'm not sure that AMRO team actually observed what happened in Indonesia a couple of days ago when President Prabowo gives speech in front of the parliament. So in my opinion, number one rule of thumb, that if we can trade directly, supplier and also buyer, that will be better, right? That's rule of thumb, no intermediaries. But if you create intermediary in between, there must be, some cost of transaction that will go up. And well, in any trade, we try to remove, the barriers to trade, right? But here we can see that, okay, barriers of trade actually installed. And number two, when there is a middleman, which is, this is a SOE, and this SOE is new, you can imagine that, now the transaction is actually not run smoothly. There must be some delays, whatever, and maybe the issue of transparency in the both sides, exporters and also importers are not happy about this. And third, even if, things run smoothly and as transparent as possible and no corruption whatsoever that we are worried, then of course, go back to the issue of foreign exchange export proceeds. Even though BI already initiated LCT, the local currency transaction, for example, we know that a lot of Chinese companies work in mining industry in Indonesia, and the product is actually for the exports. But if the export now, there is a Danantara company in there in between. Number two, the export proceed now has to be, regulated in certain ways to stay in Indonesia longer and stay only in Himbara. You can imagine how many layers of restrictions that actually introduced here. And again, we are talking about exports. Exports are very important to strengthen rupiah, but now the confidence of exporters might not be, very strong. And this is actually, again, bad signal. Even if everything runs smoothly, still, it is bad timing. Because right now, we are in the period of turbulence, and we are introducing something that is completely new and unexpected. And again, this everybody already complained so much about regulatory uncertainty in Indonesia, and this is actually a big, big change in the rule of the game of export in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And if you want to know the response of the market, yeah, this is what happened in the currency and also in the stock market. the confidence, because again, the Mr. President said that in the next, I don't know, couple of months, then it will be revisited and it will be added by 3 more products that will be subject to this, you know, state trading companies. And then we had the history before how bad actually the state trading company, the middleman in Indonesia, and even the history of you know, the VOC during, you know, that's actually become bankrupt because of corruption. And again, rule of thumb is that make trading as efficient as possible. If the issue is under invoicing or transfer pricing, that we think that, okay, it will, if we can remove all those issues and then increase the export proceed and strengthen our, you know, reserves, then let's learn from our neighboring countries and also the best auditors or the best custom system in the world, Hong Kong, Singapore, and others, in order to tackle the issue of under invoicing and also transfer pricing. And of course, law enforcement. Yeah, thank you.
Very agree, Bu Deni, not by building the new institution again. Okay. Is there any more questions? Oh, okay. Yeah.
My name is Mukni. I'm a master's student in Economics UGM. Actually, my question is related with Bu Dea about. No, it's related with Bu Dea about fiscal and monetary coordination. So my question is for Pak Juli and also AMRO FEB. I am currently working on my thesis related to monetary fiscal policy interaction in emerging economies. Given the increasing challenges in maintaining both macroeconomic stability and debt sustainability, I would like to ask, on your view, how important is monetary fiscal policy coordination in achieving a long-term economic stability, especially in emerging economies, and what would be the most effective design of such coordination, particularly in balancing short-term stabilization need with long-term fiscal discipline, while also avoiding the risks of fiscal dominance? Thank you.
Thank you, Mbak. So this is for Pak Juli, right?
Pak Juli and also AMRO FEB.
Okay.
Well, the topic itself, the points that you mentioned are so wide that it is a little bit hard to. Wow, yeah. Yeah, you can write a few different PhD theses on this one. Yeah, well, this is where to start? Monetary policy and then fiscal policy coordination becomes more critical during for the stabilization role. The old wisdom when I was a university student roughly 30 years ago was that monetary policy is more efficient in terms of the policy implementation lag, but that belief basically broke down during the pandemic and then even before the crisis experience. We basically realized that fiscal policy can be a very effective tool and very timely tool to address the this economic downturns. But the trick is that before the pandemic, and then probably the timeline is like a little bit earlier than that one. The zero lower bound was one of the issues of the monetary policy effectiveness in terms of responding to the the economic downturn. So that's where the fiscal policy is forced to do it in the forced to the economic stabilization. But at the same time, of course, the economic situation are quite different across countries, but it was the general situation. But so at the time, the key issue is that how effectively fiscal policy can be used to address these economic downturns. Then the question is that, what is the monetary policy stance at that point? Sometimes, and the worst case at the time, the wisdom is that if they move in both opposite direction, because basically the fiscal expansion is try to increase the aggregate demand to boost up the economic activities. But if the monetary policy is constraining, then that's where the inconsistency in the macro policy coordination happens. So that we usually mention that the coordination becomes critically important in the short-term policy responses to economic fluctuation. In terms of the implication of the sustainability, it is a little bit more longer-term issues, and then it closely relates to fiscal management framework. So that's why we emphasize the importance of the fiscal aggregate management. Of course, this is a critical time, especially at this point where the fiscal position significantly weakened compared to the pre-pandemic averages. But it was also true that medium-term fiscal framework is an efficient tool to manage the fiscal sustainability in the sense that basically medium-term fiscal framework is setting the trajectory of the key fiscal aggregates over the medium time. And then if there is a need for the fiscal policy to expand to address the economic fluctuation, that is the time then when the fiscal aggregate has to deviate from this trajectory that already planned. Then the question is that how to bring that back to the original trajectory, and then fiscal anchor is where the fiscal aggregate management becomes important. So that issue of the implication, how to contain the fiscal action or fiscal expansion, implication of that one on the long-term sustainability is where that the importance of fiscal management framework becomes very important. Not sure whether I explained certain part of your question, but I hope I can explain the remaining one.
Yeah, I think Luke already covered everything. I'll just give you some examples that we and the Ministry of Finance coordinate because the importance of the coordination of monetary and fiscal policy. For example, when the government decided to raise the subsidized fuel price, for example, during the previous administration, we have a coordinations like when is the right timing to increase this fuel price, especially when the price is low during the harvest season. So that kind of coordination is, we've done that kind of coordination so that the inflation expectation doesn't went up significantly because of that policy. And also, that's one of the examples. And the coordination in controlling the inflation is not only with the central government, but also with the regional government. So we have what we call inflation coordination team, where our rep office in its provinces have a close coordination with the regional government to especially discuss about the production and distribution of, especially on food, because inflation is not only about demand, but also related very closely to food production and distribution. And also coordination and synergy related to the every year, by Indonesian Ministry of Finance conduct coordination on the monetary operation. And also that's from the Bank Indonesia side, and from the government side that's related to the issuance of bonds. So how we coordinated regarding the amount, the timing, etc. So that's the coordinations that we've done so far. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you so much, Pak Julie, and also Luke for the answer. We still have around 13 minutes. Is there any more questions from the participants here? Okay. Yeah. Okay. If there is no question from participants, I will ask. So I will ask two reflective questions. The first one is about the biggest blind spot and also the forward-looking or the future consideration for all of the panelists. There is no right or wrong answer, so I will ask the same question to all the panelists. So the question is, sometimes the greatest risks are not necessarily the ones we already recognize, but rather the ones we may still underestimate. From your perspective, what is one emerging risk or uncertainty that the policymakers, particularly in Indonesia and ASEAN, may still be overlooking today? So that's the first question. And the second question, I think it should be more optimistic. Despite all the uncertainties and challenges we have discussed today, what still gives you optimism regarding the future of ASEAN+3 economies? So that's the two questions for all panelists. Should I give you time? 2 minutes? No? Yeah. If you want, you can answer first.
No, you can answer on behalf of.
So I guess a very important question to ask is this the last question?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think it's a very. I'll answer the second part first. I think what this region has is a very strong starting point, right? In the sense that we have shown both in the near term, growth has been resilient despite some of the bigger shocks that we have faced. We are still growing at above 4% for the entire region. It's not something to look down on. Inflation has been moderating for most part of the region. So near term, we are starting in a good position. But I think in the longer term, we have seen we have gotten closer together. We have become a major source of demand. We are a major global production hub, and this trend we do foresee to continue. And then now the policymakers are focusing on things that would strengthen this further. How do you have more regional dialogue? How can you strengthen some of the architecture that is necessary for resilience, energy resilience and so on. So in a sense, we are in a strong starting position. I think going forward, no one can really predict, but what I think it is, in a sense, optimistic. I'm optimistic, right? I think, but it's not something that implies that we should just rest now and just let it move and so on. I think what it implies that in this current environment, we need to double down on the efforts that we have already put in place to make sure that growth and so on is sustained going forward, and stability and inclusion is also maintained. On the biggest downside risk, I think the question is the blind spot. I think if I know, I think I should be in the financial sector rather than in the policymaker point of view. But I think what this question is really asking is also a deeper reflection of how do you respond to deep uncertainty, right? Radical uncertainty. By definition, you cannot predict what will come next. You cannot predict what will come next you can have a list of things that could come next, right? But you can't really predict what will happen from, someone wake up in the White House might tweet something that would create a significant global ramification. So in this point, I think the thinking that one of the most important principles that we need to have is actually with regards to policy flexibility. So here I would define policy flexibility as having two critical components. One is you need to have the space. You need to have the buffer, be it fiscal, be it monetary, other tools as well. Because when you're deeply uncertain, when there is a shock, you need to have that space to respond to it. Now that's one component, and I think this is well established and many people talk about, you need to rebuild policy space and so on. But I think there is another equally important part, which is really essential for effectiveness of policy and the cost of policy, which is institution. I think we need to have both competence, state capacity, competency in actually executing policy. I think that's critical. And then equally important is actually the degree of trust and confidence that you can impart on economic agents, the people on the businesses, investors. And I think that requires consistent communication, transparency, and in general, a degree of continuous communication, right, on what the policy is supposed to achieve and so on. So space and also institution, trust, credibility. Let me pass to whoever wants to take the thing next.
Let me take it. I think the earlier is better. About the optimism or pessimism, as Dr. Nam mentioned, presented, fiscal situation in general is not as optimistic as it used to be. So there is a room to improve. So that's about the current status. But I believe that I'm optimistic about the direction of changes. So it seems like the more government and then policymakers become aware of the issues and then try to move into try to change their institutions in a way that that will improve the situation. So in general, I'm a little bit less optimistic on this current status, but I'm optimistic about the change, the direction of changes. In terms of the blind spot, as the main theme of AAPR is about the fiscal management. I'd like to echo the importance of the institution, but behind that one, fiscal policy, the biggest, the less emphasized one is the strength of public, the importance of gaining the public support. So all the reforms that the government need to take in the right direction to make it durable and then make it in a right way, we need public support. It requires a lot of institutional background to make the right public support. So strong institution, the trust and everything. Transparency is one key pillar. And to basically, if the institution is set up in the right way, and then the transparent information fit into the institution, that will become the biggest force that policymakers need to make the right decision. So I think that right decision, to make the right decision happen and then move the current status on the right path, public support. And then public support is something that it requires both sides. The first one is that the policymakers and then the government as a whole need to make an effort to set up the institution right. And at the same time, from the public side, they also need to pay attention to this policy issue, fiscal policy issues, and then they need to effort. Fiscal literacy in that side are very, very important. They are talking about 200 billion, 300 billion, not like the 100 million and so on. But 100 million as an individual is a very big number. But all those numbers are rounded out. You cannot see in the fiscal discussion. So that it is very important that this fiscal discussion is something that is relevant to your life and then your offsprings as well. So that's both sides of the efforts will be critical to build up the sound public, the support to the right reform.
Blind spots. Blind spots, something that, we are not predicting at this time, and that's why we underestimate about it. For domestic, I think maybe related to the climate. Once we hit by whatever disaster, whether that's severe El Nino or floods, something, then if the government does not have enough fiscal buffer and the capacity to execute quickly, then it will create public disappointment and it will create maybe, I don't know, political instability. That's number one for the domestic blind spot. Number two, for the external blind spots, maybe comes from the, I don't know, credit market. We do not know what happened in the global credit market. All of a sudden it can happen like this, and then, you know, makes everything becomes more expensive, and we cannot basically sustain our financing. And then for the Achilles heels, the domestic economy, as already mentioned by Luke and also Alan, namely about the fiscal space and also the institutional credibility, institutional competency. Right now, yeah, and because without that, there is no public trust, no transparency, and what is the subject on the materials of communication if it is not based on competency? Then the logic will not be there. Public will be disappointed or not believe to whatever government announce. And then talking about the prospect of the region, I think the key is collective effort of the member countries to make ASEAN and also ASEAN+3, hopefully we can stretch up to +3 further north up there, to be a peaceful region. Because without peace, because right now the geopolitics kind of, you know, shaky, so ensuring that ASEAN region is a peaceful region, that's necessary condition. Then growth will be there because, well, a lot of potentials, young democracy, young populations, and so on. And like Indonesia, for example, and also Laos, Myanmar, and others, we start low. It means that the potential to grow faster is still there. So I believe that ASEAN will be still the magnet or the center of global growth in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bu Deni. Pak Julie.
Thank you. Yeah, I think nothing left to say. I think I just echoed what the Bu Deni, Alan, and Luke already mentioned that on the blind spot, that's why it's called blind spot, because we don't know what's coming next. So yeah, what is important is that we have a policy flexibility, a policy space, and also the policy credibility, so we can deal with any risk that will coming going forward. Hopefully not. On the prospect, I think, yeah, we do have a prospect from our perspective, and I think it could be also bolstered by Catherine on her presentation mentioned about the integration, the seamless and efficient movement of the goods and services. But from Bank Indonesia point of view, the area that related to Bank Indonesia, we also support with the seamless and efficient payment system across the region. So regional payments, integrated payment system is also important. So it should be followed by the seamless and efficient movement of money. So things like the QR cross-border payment system, and then the fast payment link across the country in the region is also important aspect that could support the prospect of the regional integration going forward. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you so much, Pak Julie, for the reflective answer for today's sessions. So we have reached our final for today's panel discussion. As moderator, I certainly hope that today's discussion will provide the meaningful insight into how ASEAN+3 economies can continue strengthening resilience and also sustaining inclusive growth in the middle of growing global uncertainty. On behalf of Universitas Gadjah Mada as well, I would like to thank you for all the panelists, and please give a round of applause for our panelists. Yeah. Yeah. And for all the participants, I will thank you once again for your participation, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. I learned a lot. Alan, thank you.
Semoga tidak kapok. Terima kasih.
As a token of appreciation, we would like to invite Mr. Rimawan Pradiptyo, PhD, and Mr. Elan, PhD, to give the souvenirs to our distinguished panelists and moderators. Mr. Elan Setiawan, please.
More batiks.
From the left to the right. Ladies.
Okay. Mas, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mas.
Come again.
No, thank you. The examination is over.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching to the ends of today's seminar. For the closing remarks, it is our honor to invite Mr. Abdurrahman, AMRO Deputy Director for Functional Surveillance and Research, to deliver the closing remarks. Mr. Abdurrahman, may we respectfully invite you to deliver your remarks.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang dan salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. As we come to the end of the seminar on navigating global uncertainty, sustaining growth and stability, allow me on behalf of AMRO to express our deepest appreciation to all of you for your active participation, insightful contribution, and thoughtful engagement throughout the discussion. First and foremost, I would like to convey our sincere gratitude to Faculty of Economics and Bisnis, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Pak Elan, Bu Deni, Pak Rimawan, Mas Gilang, and Pak Didi, for the excellent collaboration and strong support in co-hosting this seminar. Today's discussion reminds us that the global economy is entering a more uncertain and fragmented phase. We are witnessing a combination of challenges that are becoming increasingly interconnected: geopolitical tensions, trade fragmentation, tighter financial conditions, rapid technological transformation, climate-related risks, as well as the demographic transition. So these developments are shaping the global economic landscape in ways that they are not temporary but more structural. For our region, including Indonesia, these uncertainties pose critical policy challenges. Slower global growth, volatility in capital flows and exchange rate, and evolving the global supply chain will continue to test the resilience of our economy. However, amid these challenges, today's seminar also highlighted an important message of cautious optimism. Our region continues to demonstrate resilience. Inflation in many economies has been manageable as presented by CAT. Banking sector also generally remains sound and well capitalized. Fiscal position, while facing pressures, are in relative strength in our region. And importantly, the region continues to benefit from dynamic domestic demand and stronger regional integration. Our recent edition of the AMRO and TFPR, which is launched last month, precisely emphasized this point. Resilience alone is not sufficient. The key challenge ahead is how we transform resilience into long-term sustainable growth. This requires policies that are not only responsive to short-term shock, but also forward-looking and structural in nature. Maintaining macroeconomic and financial stability while continuing to support growth, safeguarding fiscal sustainability and strengthening fiscal management and credibility, while also ensuring the sufficient investment in human capital, infrastructure, and social protection. Improving quality of institution and bureaucracy to promote business and investment climate. And above all, it requires stronger cooperation, both domestically and regionally. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, let me once again express our sincere appreciation to Faculty of Economic and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Yogyakarta, and all distinguished speakers, participants, and organizing team for making today's seminar a success. We hope today's discussion will continue beyond this room, strengthening our collective effort to navigate uncertainty, enhance resilience, and build a more sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous future of our region. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abdurrahman, for the closing remarks. Distinguished guests, distinguished speakers, faculty members, panelists, and all participants. This concludes today's seminar on ASEAN Regional Economic Outlook and Fiscal Policy, entitled Navigating Global Uncertainty, Sustaining Growth and Stability in ASEAN. On behalf of the Faculty of Economics and Business, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and AMRO, we would like to express our sincere appreciations to all speakers, panelists, faculty members, and the moderators, and the distinguished guests for your presence and active participations. We hope today's seminar has provided a meaningful insights into ASEAN's economic outlook, fiscal policy challenges, and regional cooperation in navigating global uncertainty. Thank you very much for joining us today. Good afternoon.